Chapter 1. You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth, mainly. There was things which he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That is nothing. I never seen anybody but lied one time or another without it was Aunt Polly, or the widow, or maybe Mary. Aunt Polly, Tom's Aunt Polly, she is, and Mary, and the widow Douglas is all told about in that book, which is mostly a true book, with some stretchers, as I said before. Now the way that the book winds up is this. Tom and me found the money that the robbers hid in the cave, and it made us rich. We got $6,000 apiece, all gold. It was an awful sight of money when it was piled up. Well, Judge Thatcher, he took it and put it out at interest, and it fetched us $1 a day apiece all the year round, more than a body could tell what to do with. The widow Douglas, she took me for her son and allowed she would civilize me, but it was rough living in the house all the time, considering how dismal regular and decent the widow was in all her ways. And so when I couldn't stand it no longer, I lit out. I got into my old rags and my sugar hogshead again and was free and satisfied. But Tom Sawyer, he hunted me up and said he was going to start a band of robbers, and I might join if I would go back to the widow and be respectable. So I went back. The widow, she cried over me and called me a poor lost lamb, and she called me a lot of other names, too, but she never meant no harm by it. She put me in them new clothes again, and I couldn't do nothing but sweat and feel all cramped up. Well, then, the old thing commenced again. The widow rung a bell for supper, and you had to come to time. When you got to the table, you couldn't go right to eating, but you had to wait for the widow to tuck down her head and grumble a little over the victuals, though there warn't really anything the matter with them. That is, nothing, only everything was cooked by itself. In a barrel of odds and ends it is different. Things get mixed up, and the juice kind of swaps around, and the things go better. After supper, she got out her book and learned me about Moses and the bulrushers, and I was in a sweat to find out all about him. But by and by she let it out that Moses had been dead a considerable long time. So then I didn't care no more about him, because I don't take no stock in dead people. Pretty soon I wanted to smoke, and asked the widow to let me. But she wouldn't. She said it was a mean practice and wasn't clean, and I must try to not do it any more. That is just the way with some people. They get down on a thing when they don't know nothing about it. Here she was, bothering about Moses, which was no kin to her, and no use to anybody, being gone, you see, yet finding a power of fault with me for doing a thing that had some good in it. And she took snuff, too. Of course that was all right, because she'd done it herself. Her sister, Miss Watson, a tolerable slim old maid, with goggles on, had just come to live with her, and took a set at me now with a spelling book. She worked me middling hard for about an hour, and then the widow made her ease up. I couldn't stood it much longer. Then for an hour it was deadly dull, and I was fidgety. Miss Watson would say, "Don't put your feet up there, Huckleberry, and don't scrunch up like that, Huckleberry, set up straight." And pretty soon she would say, "Don't gap and stretch like that, Huckleberry, why don't you try to behave?" Then she told me all about the bad place, and I said I wished I was there. She got mad then, but I didn't mean no harm. All I wanted was to go somewheres. All I wanted was a change. I warn't particular. She said it was wicked to say what I said she wouldn't say it for the whole world. She was going to live so as to go to the good place. Well, I couldn't see no advantage in going where she was going, so I made up my mind I wouldn't try for it. But I never said so, because it would only make trouble and wouldn't do no good. Now she had got a start, and she went on and told me all about the good place. She said all a body would have to do there was to go around all day long with a harp and sing forever and ever. So I didn't think much of it, but I never said so. I asked her if she reckoned Tom Sawyer would go there, and she said not by a considerable sight. I was glad about that, because I wanted him and me to be together. Miss Watson, she kept pecking at me, and it got tiresome and lonesome. By and by, they fetched the niggers in and had prayers, and then everybody was off to bed. I went up to my room with a piece of candle and put it on the table. Then I sat down in a chair by the window and tried to think of something cheerful, but it warn't no use. I felt so lonesome I most wished I was dead. The stars were shining, and the leaves rustled in the woods ever so mournful, and I heard an owl away off, hoo-hooing about somebody that was dead, and a whippoorwill and a dog crying about somebody that was going to die, and the wind was trying to whisper something to me, and I couldn't make out what it was. And so it made the cold shivers run over me. Then away out in the woods, I heard that kind of a sound that a ghost makes when it wants to tell about something that's on its mind and can't make itself understood, and so can't rest easy in its grave, and has to go about that way every night grieving. I got so downhearted and scared I did wish I had some company. Pretty soon a spider went crawling up my shoulder, and I flipped it off, and it lit in the candle, and before I could budge it was all shriveled up. I didn't need anybody to tell me that that was an awful bad sign and would fetch me some bad luck, so I was scared and most shook the clothes off of me. I got up and turned around in my tracks 3 times and crossed my breast every time, and then I tied up a little lock of my hair with a thread to keep witches away. But I had no confidence. You do that when you've lost a horseshoe that you've found, instead of nailing it up over the door, but I hadn't ever heard anybody say it was any way to keep off bad luck when you'd killed a spider. I sat down again, shaking all over, and got out my pipe for a smoke. For the house was all as still as death now, and so the widow wouldn't know. Well, after a long time I heard the clock away off in the town go boom, 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 12 licks, and all still again, stiller than ever. Pretty soon I heard a twig snap down in the dark amongst the trees. Something was a-stirring. I sat still and listened. Directly I could just barely hear a meow. Meow. Down there. That was good. Says I, meow. Meow. As soft as I could, and then I put out the light and scrambled out of the window onto the shed. Then I slipped down to the ground and crawled in among the trees, and sure enough, there was Tom Sawyer waiting for me. Chapter 2. We went tiptoeing along a path amongst the trees back towards the end of the widow's garden, stooping down so as the branches wouldn't scrape our heads. When we was passing by the kitchen, I fell over a root and made a noise. We crouched down and laid still. Miss Watson's big nigger, named Jim, was sitting in the kitchen door. We could see him pretty clear because there was a light behind him. He got up and stretched his neck out about a minute, listening. Then he says, "Who'd up?" He listened some more. Then he come tiptoeing down and stood right between us. We could have touched him, nearly. Well, likely it was minutes. And minutes that there warn't a sound, and we all there so close together. There was a place on my ankle that got to itching, but I danc't scratch it. And then my ear begun to itch, and next my back, right between my shoulders. Seemed like I'd die if I couldn't scratch. Well, I've noticed that thing plenty times since. If you are with the quality, or at a funeral, or trying to go to sleep when you ain't sleepy, if you are anywheres where it won't do for you to scratch, why, you will itch all over and upwards of 1,000 places. Pretty soon Jim says, "Say, who is you? Where is you? Dog my cats yef I didn't hear somefin." Well, I know what I's gwine to do. I's gwine to set down here and listen till I hears it agin. So he sat down on the ground betwixt me and Tom. He leaned his back up against a tree and stretched his legs out till one of them most touched one of mine. My nose begun to itch. It itched till the tears come into my eyes, but I danc't scratch. Then it begun to itch on the inside. Next I got to itching underneath. I didn't know how I was going to set still. This miserableness went on as much as 6 or 7 minutes, but it seemed a sight longer than that. I was itching in 11 different places now. I reckoned I couldn't stand it more'n a minute longer, but I set my teeth hard and got ready to try. Just then, Jim begun to breathe heavy. Next he begun to snore, and then I was pretty soon comfortable again. Tom, he made a sign to me, kind of a little noise with his mouth, and we went creeping away on our hands and knees. When we was 10 foot off, Tom whispered to me and wanted to tie Jim to the tree for fun. But I said, no, he might wake and make a disturbance, and then they'd find out I weren't in. Then Tom said he hadn't got candles enough, and he would slip in the kitchen and get some more. I didn't want him to try. I said, Jim might wake up and come. But Tom wanted to risk it, so we slid in there and got 3 candles, and Tom laid 5 cents on the table for pay. Then we got out, and I was in a sweat to get away, but nothing would do Tom, but he must crawl to where Jim was, on his hands and knees, and place something on him. I waited, and it seemed a good while. Everything was so still and lonesome. As soon as Tom was back, we cut along the path, around the garden fence, and by fetched up on the steep top of the hill the other side of the house. Tom said he slipped Jim's hat off of his head and hung it on a limb right over him, and Jim stirred a little, but he didn't wake. Afterwards, Jim said the witches bewitched him and put him in a trance, and rode him all over the state, and then set him under the trees again, and hung his hat on a limb to show who'd done it. And next time Jim told it, he said they rode him down to New Orleans, and after that, every time he told it, he spread it more and more, till by and by he said they rode him all over the world, and tired him most to death, and his back was all over saddle boils. Jim was monstrous proud about it, and he got so he wouldn't hardly notice the other niggers. Niggers would come miles to hear Jim tell about it, and he was more looked up to than any nigger in that country. Strange niggers would stand with their mouths open and look him all over, same as if he was a wonder. Niggers is always talking about witches in the dark by the kitchen fire, but whenever one was talking and letting on to know all about such things, Jim would happen in and say, "H.M., what you know about witches?" And that nigger was corked up and had to take a back seat. Jim always kept that 5-center piece round his neck with a string, and said it was a charm the devil give to him with his own hands, and told him he could cure anybody with it and fetch witches whenever he wanted to just by saying something to it. But he never told what it was. He said to it, niggers would come from all around there and give Jim anything they had, just for a sight of that 5-center piece, but they wouldn't touch it, because the devil had had his hands on it. Jim was most ruined for a servant, because he got stuck up on account of having seen the devil and been rode by witches. Well, when Tom and me got to the edge of the hilltop, we looked away, down into the village, and could see 3 or 4 lights twinkling, where there was sick folks, maybe, and the stars over us was sparkling, ever so fine, and down by the village was the river, a whole mile broad, and awful still and grand. We went down the hill and found Joe, Harper, and Ben Rogers, and 2 or 3 more of the boys, hid in the old tanyard. So we unhitched a skiff and pulled down the river 2.5 miles to the big scar on the hillside and went ashore. We went to a clump of bushes, and Tom made everybody swear to keep the secret, and then showed them a hole in the hill, right in the thickest part of the bushes. Then we lit the candles and crawled in on our hands and knees. We went about 200 yards, and then the cave opened up. Tom poked about amongst the passages and pretty soon ducked under a wall where you wouldn't have noticed that there was a hole. We went along a narrow place and got into a kind of room, all damp and sweaty and cold, and there we stopped. Tom says, "Now, we'll start this band of robbers and call it Tom Sawyer's Gang. Everybody that wants to join has got to take an oath and write his name in blood." Everybody was willing. So Tom got out a sheet of paper that he had, wrote the oath on, and read it. It swore every boy to stick to the band and never tell any of the secrets, and if anybody done anything to any boy in the band, whichever boy was ordered to kill that person, and his family must do it, and he mustn't eat, and he mustn't sleep till he had killed them and hacked a cross in their breasts, which was the sign of the band, and nobody that didn't belong to the band could use That Mark, and if he did, he must be sued, and if he done it again, he must be killed. And if anybody that belonged to the band told the secrets, he must have his throat cut, and then have his carcass burnt up and the ashes scattered all around, and his name blotted off of the list with blood and never mentioned again by the gang, but have a curse put on it and be forgot forever. Everybody said it was a real, beautiful oath, and asked Tom if he got it out of his own head. He said some of it, but the rest was out of pirate books and robber books, and every gang that was high-toned had it. Some thought it would be good to kill the families of boys that told the secrets. Tom said it was a good idea, so he took a pencil and wrote it in. Then Ben Rogers says, "Here's Huck Finn. He hain't got no family. What you going to do about him?" "Well, hain't he got a father?" says Tom Sawyer. "Yes, he's got a father, but you can't never find him these days. He used to lay drunk with the hogs in the tan yard, but he hain't been seen in these parts for a year or more. They talked it over, and they was going to rule me out, because they said every boy must have a family or somebody to kill, or else it wouldn't be fair and square for the others. Well, nobody could think of anything to do. Everybody was stumped and set still. I was most ready to cry, but all at once I thought of a way, and so I offered them Miss Watson. They could kill her. Everybody said, 'Oh, she'll do. That's all right. Huck can come in.' Then they all stuck a pin in their fingers to get blood to sign with, and I made my mark on the paper. 'Now,' says Ben Rogers, 'what's the line of business of this gang?' 'Nothing, only robbery and murder,' Tom said. 'But who are we going to rob? Houses or cattle or stuff?' 'Stealing cattle and such things ain't robbery. It's burglary,' says Tom Sawyer. 'We ain't burglars. That ain't no sort of style. We are highwaymen. We stop stages and carriages on the road with masks on and kill the people and take their watches and money.' 'Must we always kill the people?' 'Oh, certainly. It's best. Some authorities think different, but mostly it's considered best to kill them, except some that you bring to the cave here and keep them till they're ransomed.' 'Ransomed? What's that?' 'I don't know, but that's what they do. I've seen it in books, and so, of course, that's what we've got to do. But how can we do it if we don't know what it is?' 'Why, blame it all, we've got to do it. Don't I tell you it's in the books? Do you want to go to doing different from what's in the books and get things all muddled up?' 'Oh, that's all very fine to say, Tom Sawyer, but how in the nation are these fellows going to be ransomed if we don't know how to do it to them? That's the thing I want to get at. Now, what do you reckon it is?' 'Well, I don't know. But per APS, if we keep them till they're ransomed, it means that we keep them till they're dead. Now, that's something like. That'll answer. Why couldn't you said that before? We'll keep them till they're ransomed to death, and bothersome lot. Deacon Wynn get back the money he lost on pork? Why can't the widow get back her silver snuff box that was stole? Why can't Miss Watson fat up?' 'No,' says I to myself, 'there ain't nothing in it.' I went and told the widow about it, and she said the thing a body could get by praying for it was spiritual gifts. This was too many for me, but she told me what she meant. I must help other people and do everything I could for other people and look out for them all the time and never think about myself. This was including Miss Watson, as I took it. I went out in the woods and turned it over in my mind a long time, but I couldn't see no advantage about it, except for the other people. So at last I reckoned I wouldn't worry about it any more, but just let it go. Sometimes the widow would take me one side and talk about Providence in a way to make a body's mouth water, but maybe next day Miss Watson would take hold and knock it all down again. I judged I could see that there was two Providences, and a poor chap would stand considerable show with the widow's Providence, but if Miss Watson's got him, there warn't no help for him any more. I thought it all out, and reckoned I would belong to the widow's if he wanted me, though I couldn't make out how he was going to be any better off than what he was before, seeing I was so ignorant and so kind of low down and ornery. Pap he hadn't been seen for more than a year, and that was comfortable for me. I didn't want to see him no more. He used to always whale me when he was sober and could get his hands on me, though I used to take to the woods most of the time when he was around. Well, about this time, he was found in the river drowned dead, about 12 miles above town, so people said. They judged it was him. Anyway, said this drowned dead man was just his size and was ragged and had uncommon long hair, which was all like pap, but they couldn't make nothing out of the face because it had been in the water so long it warn't much like a face at all. They said he was floating on his back in the water. They took him and buried him on the bank, but I warn't comfortable long because I happened to think of something. I knowed mighty well that a drowned dead man don't float on his back, but on his face. So I knowed then that this warn't pap, but a woman dressed up in a man's clothes. So I was uncomfortable again. I judged the old man would turn up again by and by, though I wished he wouldn't. We played robber now and then about a month, and then I resigned. Oh, the boys did. We hadn't robbed nobody, hadn't killed any people, but only just pretended. We used to hop out of the woods and go charging down on hog drivers and women in carts taking garden stuff to market. But we never hived any of them. Tom Sawyer called the hogs ingots, and he called the turnips and stuff jewelry. And we would go to the cave and powwow over what we had done and how many people we had killed and marked. But I couldn't see no profit in it. One time Tom sent a boy to run about town with a blazing stick, which he called a slogan, which was the sign for the gang to get together, and then he said he had got secret news by his spies that next day a whole parcel of Spanish merchants and rich Arabs was going to camp in Cave Hollow, with 200 elephants and 600 camels and over 1,000 Sumter mules, all loaded down with demons, and they didn't have only a guard of 400 soldiers, and so we would lay in ambuscade, as he called it, and kill the lot and scoop the things. He said we must slick up our swords and guns and get ready. He never could go after even a turnip cart, but he must have the swords and guns all scoured up for it, though they was only lath and broomsticks, and you might scour at them till you rotted, and then they warn't worth a mouthful of ashes more than what they was before. I didn't believe we could lick such a crowd of Spaniards and Arabs, but I wanted to see the camels and elephants, so I was on hand next day, Saturday, in the ambuscade, and when we got the word we rushed out of the woods and down the hill. But there warn't no Spaniards and Arabs, and there warn't no camels nor no elephants. It warn't anything but a Sunday school picnic, and only a primer class at that. We busted it up and chased the children up the hollow, but we never got anything but some donuts and jam, though Ben Rogers got a rag doll, and Joe Harper got a hymn book and a tract, and then the teacher charged in and made us drop everything and cut. I didn't see no demons, and I told Tom Sawyer so. He said there was loads of them there, anyway, and he said there was Arabs there, too, and elephants and things. I said, why couldn't we see them then? He said if I weren't so ignorant, but had read a book called Don Quixote, I would know without asking. He said it was all done by enchantment. He said there was hundreds of soldiers there, and elephants and treasure, and so on, but we had enemies which he called magicians, and they had turned the whole thing into an infant Sunday school, just out of spite. I said, all right, then the thing for us to do was to go for the magicians. Tom Sawyer said I was a numbskull. Why, said he, a magician could call up a lot of genies, and they would hash you up like nothing before you could say Jack Robinson. They are as tall as a tree and as big around as a church. Well, I says, I suppose we got some genies to help us. Can't we lick the other crowd then? How you going to get them? I don't know. How do they get them? Why, they rub an old tin lamp or an iron ring, and then the genies come tearing in, with the thunder and lightning ripping around, and the smoke rolling, and everything they're told to do they up and do it. They don't think nothing of pulling a shot tower up by the roots and belting a Sunday school superintendent over the head with it, or any other man who makes them tear around so. Why, Whoever rubs the lamp or the ring. They belong to whoever rubs the lamp or the ring, and they've got to do whatever he says. If he tells them to build a palace 40 miles long out of demons and fill it full of chewing gum or whatever you want and fetch an emperor's daughter from China for you to marry, they've got to do it, and they've got to do it before sunup next morning, too. And more, they've got to waltz that palace around over the country wherever you want it, you understand. Well, says I think they are a pack of flatheads for not keeping the palace themselves instead of fooling them away like that. And what's more, if I was one of them, I would see a man in Jericho before I would drop my business and come to him for the rubbing of an old tin lamp. How you talk, Huck Finn. Why, you'd have to come when he rubbed it, whether you wanted to or not. What? And I as high as a tree and as big as a church? All right then, I would come, but I lay I'd make that man climb the highest tree there was in the country. Shucks, it ain't no use to talk to you, Huck Finn. You don't seem to know anything. Somehow, perfect saphead. I thought all this over for 2 or 3 days, and then I reckoned I would see if there was anything in it. I got an old tin lamp and an iron ring, and went out in the woods and rubbed till I sweat like an Injun, calculating to build a palace and sell it, but it warn't no use. None of the genies come. So then I judged that all that stuff was only just one of Tom Sawyer's lies. I reckoned he believed in the Arabs and the elephants, but as for me, I think different. It had all the marks of a Sunday school. Chapter 4. Well, 3 or 4 months run along, and it was well into the winter. Now, I had been to school most all the time and could spell and read and write just a little and could say the multiplication table up to 6 times 7 is 35, and I don't reckon I could ever get any further than that if I was to live forever. I don't take no stock in mathematics, anyway. At first I hated the school, but by and by I got so I could stand it. Whenever I got uncommon tired, I played hooky, and the hiding I got next day done me good and cheered me up. So the longer I went to school, the easier it got to be. I was getting sort of used to the widow's ways, too, and they weren't so raspy on me. Living in a house and sleeping in a bed pulled on me pretty tight mostly, but before the cold weather I used to slide out and sleep in the woods sometimes, and so that was a rest to me. I liked the old ways best, but I was getting so. I liked the new ones, too, a little bit. The widow said I was coming along slow but sure, and doing very satisfactory. She said she warn't ashamed of me. One morning I happened to turn over the salt cellar at breakfast. I reached for some of it as quick as I could to throw over my left shoulder and keep off the bad luck, but Miss Watson was in ahead of me and crossed me off. She says, "Take your hands away, Huckleberry, what a mess you are always making." The widow put in a good word for me, but that weren't going to keep off the bad luck. I knowed that well enough. I started out, after breakfast, feeling worried and shaky, and wondering where it was going to fall on me, and what it was going to be. There is ways to keep off some kinds of bad luck, but this wasn't one of them kind. So I never tried to do anything, but just poked along, low-spirited and on the watch-out. I went down to the front garden and clumb over the stile where you go through the high board fence. There was an inch of new snow on the ground, and I seen somebody's tracks. They had come up from the quarry and stood around the stile a while, and then went on around the garden fence. It was funny they hadn't come in after standing around so. I couldn't make it out. It was very curious, somehow. I was going to follow around, but I stooped down to look at the tracks first. I didn't notice anything at first, but next I did. There was a cross in the left boot heel made with big nails to keep off the devil. I was up in a second and shinning down the hill. I looked over my shoulder every now and then, but I didn't see nobody. I was at Judge Thatcher's as quick as I could get there. He said, "Why, my boy, you are all out of breath. Did you come for your interest?" "No, sir," I says. "Is there some for me?" "Oh, yes, a half-yearly is in, last night. Over $150. Quite a fortune for you. You had better let me invest it along with your 6,000, because if you take it, you'll spend it. No, sir, I says, I don't want to spend it. I don't want it at all, nor the 6,000, nother. I want you to take it. I want to give it to you, the 6,000 and all. He looked surprised. He couldn't seem to make it out. He says, why, what can you mean, my boy? I says, don't you ask me no questions about it, please. You'll take it, won't you? He says, well, I'm puzzled. Is something the matter? Please take it, says I, and don't ask me nothing. Then I won't have to tell no lies. He studied a while, and then he says, oh, I think I see. You want to sell all your property to me, not give it. That's the correct idea. Then he wrote something on a paper and read it over, and says, there, you see it says for a consideration. That means I have bought it of you and paid you for it. Here's $1 for you. Now you sign it. So I signed it and left. Miss Watson's nigger, Jim, had a hairball as big as your fist, which had been took out of the fourth stomach of an ox, and he used to do magic with it. He said there was a spirit inside of it, and it knowed everything. So I went to him that night and told him Pap was here again, for I found his tracks in the snow. What I wanted to know was what he was going to do, and was he going to stay? Jim got out his hairball and said something over it, and then he held it up and dropped it on the floor. It fell pretty solid and only rolled about an inch. Jim tried it again, and then another time, and it acted just the same. Jim got down on his knees and put his ear against it and listened. But it warn't no use. He said it wouldn't talk. He said sometimes it wouldn't talk without money. I told him I had an old slick counterfeit quarter that warn't no good because the brass showed through the silver a little, and it wouldn't pass nohow, even if the brass didn't show, because it was so slick it felt greasy, and so that would tell on it every time. I reckoned I wouldn't say nothing about the $1 I got from the judge. I said it was pretty bad money, but maybe the hairball would take it, because maybe it wouldn't know the difference. Jim smelled it and bit it and rubbed it and said he would manage so the hairball would think it was good. He said he would split open a raw Irish potato and stick the quarter in between and keep it there all night, and next morning you couldn't see no brass, and it wouldn't feel greasy no more, and so anybody in town would take it in a minute, let alone a hairball. Well, I knowed a potato would do that before, but I had forgot it. Jim put the quarter under the hairball and got down and listened again. This time he said the hairball was all right. He said it would tell my whole fortune if I wanted it to. I says, go on. So the hairball talked to Jim, and Jim told it to me. He says, yo, old father don't know yet what he's going to do. Sometimes he spec he'll go away, and den again he spec he'll stay. The best way is to res easy and let the old man take his own way. Days 2 angels hovering ruin 'bout him. One UVM is white and shiny, and t'other one is black. The white one gets him to go right a little while, then the black one sail, and then bust it all up. A body can't tell yet which one gwine to fetch him at the loss. But you is all right. You gwine to have considerable trouble in yo life, and considerable joy. Sometimes you gwine to get hurt, and sometimes you gwine to get sick, but every time you's gwine to get well again. Days 2 gals flyin' 'bout you in yo life. One UVM's light, and t'other one is dark. One is rich, and t'other is poor. You's gwine to marry de po one fust and de rich one by and by. You wants to keep way from de water as much as you can, and don't run no risk. Case it's down in de bills that you's gwine to get hung. When I lit my candle and went up to my room that night, there sat Pap, his own self. Chapter 5. I had shut the door too. Then I turned around, and there he was. I used to be scared of him all the time. He tan me so much. I reckoned I was scared now too, but in a minute I see I was mistaken. That is, after the first jolt, as you may say, when my breath sort of hitched, he being so unexpected, but right away after I see I warn't scared of him worth both ring about. He was most 50, and he looked it. His hair was long and tangled and greasy and hung down, and you could see his eyes shining through like he was behind vines. It was all black, no gray, so was his long, mixed-up whiskers. There warn't no color in his face, where his face showed. It was white, not like another man's white, but a white to make a body sick, a white to make a body's flesh crawl, a tree-toad white, a fishbelly white. As for his clothes, just rags, that was all. He had one ankle resting on t'other knee. The boot on that foot was busted, and two of his toes stuck through, and he worked them now and then. His hat was laying on the floor, an old black slouch with the top caved in, like a lid. I stood looking at him. He sat there looking at me, with his chair tilted back a little. I set the candle down. I noticed the window was up, so he had clumb in by the shed. He kept looking me all over. By and by he says, "Starchy clothes, very. You think you're a good deal of a big bug, don't you?" "Maybe I am, maybe I ain't," I says. "Don't you give me none o' your lip," says he. "You've put on considerable many frills since I've been away. I'll take you down a peg before I get done with you. You're educated, too, they say, can read and write. You think you're better'n your father, now, don't you, because he can't? I'll take it out of you. Who told you might meddle with such highfalutin foolishness, hey? Who told you could?" "The widow. She told me." "The widow, hey? And who told the widow she could put in her shovel about a thing that ain't none of her business? Nobody never told her." "Well, I'll learn her how to meddle. And looky here, you drop that school, you hear? I'll learn people to bring up a boy to put on airs over his own father and let on to be better in what he is. You lemme catch you fooling around that school again, you hear? Your mother couldn't read, and she couldn't write, nother, before she died. None of the family couldn't before they died. I can't, and here you're swelling yourself up like this. I ain't the man to stand it, you hear? Say, let me hear you read." I took up a book and begun something about General Washington and the wars. When I'd read about a half a minute, he fetched the book a whack with his hand and knocked it across the house. He says, "It's so. You can do it. I had my doubts when you told me. Now looky here, you stop that putting on frills. I won't have it. I'll lay for you, my smarty, and if I catch you about that school, I'll tan you good. First, you know you'll get religion, too. I never see such a son." He took up a little blue and yaller picture of some cows and a boy, and says, "What's this?" "It's something they give me for learning my lessons good." He tore it up and says, "I'll give you something better. I'll give you a cowhide." He sat there mumbling and growling a minute, and then he says, "Ain't you a sweet-scented dandy, though? A bed and bedclothes and a looking-glass and a piece of carpet on the floor and your own father. Got to sleep with the hogs in the tan yard. I never see such a son. I bet I'll take some o' these frills out o' you before I'm done with you. Why, there ain't no end to your airs. They say you're rich. Hey, how's that? They lie, that's how. Looky here. Mind how you talk to me. I'm standing about all I can stand now, so don't gimme no sass. I've been in town 2 days, and I hain't heard nothing but about you bein' rich. I heard about it away down the river, too. That's why I come. You give me that money. Tomorrow, I want it. I hain't got no money. It's a lie. Judge Thatcher's got it. You get it. I want it. I hain't got no money, I tell you. You ask Judge Thatcher. He'll tell you the same. All right. I'll ask him, and I'll make him pungle, too, or I'll know the reason why. Say, how much you got in your pocket? I want it. I hain't got only $1, and I want that, too. It don't make no difference what you want it for. You just shell it out." He took it and bit it to see if it was good, and then he said he was going downtown to get some whiskey. Said he hadn't had a drink all day. When he had got out on the shed, he put his head in again and cussed me for putting on frills and trying to be better than him. And when I reckoned he was gone, he come back and put his head in again and told me to mind about that school, because he was going to lay for me and lick me if I didn't drop that. Next day he was drunk, and he went to Judge Thatcher's and bully-ragged him and tried to make him give up the money, but he couldn't, and then he swore he'd make the law force him. The judge and the widow went to law to get the court to take me away from him and let one of them be my guardian. But it was a new judge that had just come, and he didn't know the old man. So he said courts mustn't interfere and separate families if they could help it. Said he'd rather not take a child away from its father. So Judge Thatcher and the widow had to quit on the business. That pleased the old man till he couldn't rest. He said he'd cowhide me till I was black and blue if I didn't raise some money for him. I borrowed $3 from Judge Thatcher, and Pap took it and got drunk and went blowing around and cussing and whooping and carrying on. And he kept it up all over town with a tin pan till most midnight. Then they jailed him, and next day they had him before court and jailed him again for a week. But he said he was satisfied, said he was boss of his son, and he'd make it warm for him. When he got out, the new judge said he was going to make a man of him. So he took him to his own house and dressed him up clean and nice, and had him to breakfast and dinner and supper with the family, and was just old pie to him, so to speak. And after supper he talked to him about temperance and such things till the old man cried and said he'd been a fool and fooled away his life, but now he was going to turn over a new leaf and be a man nobody wouldn't be ashamed of, and he hoped the judge would help him and not look down on him. The judge said he could hug him for them words, so he cried, and his wife she cried. Again, Pap said he'd been a man that had always been misunderstood before, and the judge said he believed it. The old man said that what a man wanted that was down was sympathy, and the judge said it was so. So they cried again. And when it was bedtime, the old man rose up and held out his hand and says, "Look at it, gentlemen and ladies all. Take a hold of it. Shake it. There's a hand that was the hand of a hog, but it ain't so no more. It's the hand of a man that started in on a new life, and'll die before he'll go back. You mark them words. Don't forget I said them. It's a clean hand now. Shake it. Don't be afeard." So they shook it, one after the other, all around, and cried. The judge's wife she kissed it. Then the old man he signed a pledge, made his mark. The judge said it was the holiest time on record, or something like that. Then they tucked the old man into a beautiful room, which was the spare room, and in the night sometime he got powerful thirsty and clumb out on to the porch roof and slid down a stanchion and traded his new coat for a jug of 40 rod and clumb back again and had a good old time, and towards daylight he crawled out again, drunk as a fiddler, and rolled off the porch and broke his left arm in 2 places, and was most froze to death when somebody found him after sunup. And when they come to look at that spare room, they had to take soundings before they could navigate it. The judge he felt kind of sore. He said he reckoned a body could reform the old man with a shotgun, maybe, but he didn't know no other way. Chapter 6. Well, pretty soon the old man was up and around again, and then he went for Judge Thatcher in the courts to make him give up that money, and he went for me, too, for not stopping school. He catch me a couple of times and thrashed me, but I went to school just the same and dodged him or outrun him most of the time. I didn't want to go to school much before, but I reckoned I'd go now to spite Pap. That law trial was a slow business. Appeared like they weren't ever going to get started on it. So every now and then I'd borrow $2 or $3 off of the judge for him to keep from getting a cowhiding. Every time he got money, he got drunk, and every time he got drunk, he raised Cain around town, and every time he raised Cain, he got jailed. He was just suited. This kind of thing was right in his line. He got to hanging around the widows too much, and so she told him at last that if he didn't quit using around there, she would make trouble for him. Well, wasn't he mad? He said he would show who was Huck, Finn's boss. So he watched out for me one day in the spring and catched me and took me up the river about 3 miles in a skiff and crossed over to the Illinois shore where it was woody and there weren't no houses but an old log hut in a place where the timber was so thick You couldn't find it if you didn't know where it was. He kept me with him all the time, and I never got a chance to run off. We lived in that old cabin, and he always locked the door and put the key under his head nights. He had a gun which he had stole, I reckon, and we fished and hunted, and that was what we lived on. Every little, while he locked me in and went down to the store, 3 miles, to the ferry, and traded fish and game for whiskey, and fetched it home and got drunk and had a good time, and licked me. The widow, she found out where I was by and by, and she sent a man over to try to get hold of me, but Pap drove him off with the gun, and it warn't long after that till I was used to being where I was, and liked it, all but the cowhide part. It was kind of lazy and jolly, laying off comfortable all day, smoking, and fishing, and no books nor study. 2 months or more run along, and my clothes got to be all rags and dirt, and I didn't see how I'd ever got to like it so well at the widow's, where you had to wash and eat on a plate, and comb up, and go to bed and get up regular, and be forever bothering over a book, and have old Miss Watson pecking at you all the time. I didn't want to go back no more. I had stopped cussing, because the widow didn't like it, but now I took to it again because Pap had no objections. It was pretty good times up in the woods. There, take it all around. But by and by Pap got too handy with his hick rye, and I couldn't stand it. I was all over welts. He got a going away so much, too, and locking me in. Once he locked me in and was gone 3 days. It was dreadful lonesome. I judged he had got drowned dead, and I wasn't ever going to get out any more. I was scared. I made up my mind I would fix up some way to leave there. I had tried to get out of that cabin many a time, but I couldn't find no way. There warn't a window to it big enough for a dog to get through. I couldn't get up the chimbley. It was too narrow. The door was thick, solid oak slabs. Pap was pretty careful not to leave a knife or anything in the cabin when he was away. I reckon I had hunted the place over as much as 100 times. Well, I was most all the time at it, because it was about the only way to put in the time. But this time I found something at last. I found an old, rusty wood saw without any handle. It was laid in between a rafter and the clapboards of the roof. I greased it up and went to work. There was an old horse blanket nailed against the logs at the far end of the cabin behind the table to keep the wind from blowing through the chinks and putting the candle out. I got under the table and raised the blanket and went to work to saw a section of the big bottom log out, big enough to let me through. Well, it was a good long job, but I was getting towards the end of it when I heard Pap's gun in the woods. I got rid of the signs of my work and dropped the blanket and hid my saw, and pretty soon Pap come in. Pap warn't in a good humor, so he was his natural self. He said he was downtown and everything was going wrong. His lawyer said he reckoned he would win his lawsuit and get the money if they ever got started on the trial, but then there was ways to put it off a long time, and Judge Thatcher knowed how to do it, and he said people allowed there'd be another trial to get me away from him and give me to the widow for my guardian, and they guessed it would win this time. This shook me up considerable, because I didn't want to go back to the widow's anymore and be so cramped up and civilized, as they called it. Then the old man got to cussing and cussed everything and everybody he could think of, and then cussed them all over again to make sure he hadn't skipped any. And after that he polished off with a kind of a general cuss all round, including a considerable parcel of people which he didn't know the names of, and so called them what's his name when he got to them, and went right along with his cussing. He said he would like to see the widow get me. He said he would watch out, and if they tried to come any such game on him, he knowed of a place 6 or 7 mile off to stow me in, where they might hunt till they dropped and they couldn't find me. That made me pretty uneasy again, but only for a minute. I reckoned I wouldn't stay on hand till he got that chance. The old man made me go to the skiff and fetch the things he had got. There was a 50-pound sack of cornmeal and a side of bacon, ammunition, and a 4-gallon jug of whiskey, and an old book and 2 newspapers for wadding, besides some tow. I toted up a load and went back and sat down on the bow of the skiff to rest. I thought it all over, and I reckon I would walk off with the gun and some lines, and take to the woods when I run away. I guessed I wouldn't stay in one place, but just tramp right across the country, mostly night times, and hunt and fish to keep alive, and so get so far away that the old man nor the widow couldn't ever find me any more. I judged I would saw out and leave that night if Pap got drunk enough, and I reckoned he would. I got so full of it I didn't notice how long I was staying till the old man hollered and asked me whether I was asleep or drowned dead. I got the things all up to the cabin, and then it was about dark. While I was cooking supper, the old man took a swig or two and got sort of warmed up and went to ripping again. He had been drunk over in town and laid in the gutter all night, and he was a sight to look at. A body would have thought he was Adam. He was just all mud. Whenever his liquor begun to work, he most always went for the government. This time he says, "Call this a government? Why, just look at it and see what it's like. Here's the law, a standing ready to take a man's son away from him. A man's own son, which he has had all the trouble and all the anxiety and all the expense of raising. Yes, just as that man has got that son, raised at last, and ready to go to work and begin to do soothin' for him and give him a rest, the law up and goes for him. And they call that government. That ain't all, nother. The law backs that old judge Thatcher up and helps him to keep me out o' my property. Here's what the law does. The law takes a man worth $6,000 and upards and jams him into an old trap of a cabin like this, and lets him go round in clothes that ain't fittin' for a hog. They call that government. A man can't get his rights in a government like this. Sometimes I've a mighty notion to just leave the country for good and all. Yes, and I told him so. I told old Thatcher so to his face. Lots of 'em heard me and can tell what I said. Says I, for 2 cents I'd leave the blamed country and never come a near it again. Them's the very words. I says, look at my hat, if you call it a hat, but the lid raises up and the rest of it goes down till it's below my chin, and then it ain't rightly a hat at all, but more like my head was shoved up through a jinto stovepipe. Look at it, says I, such a hat for me to wear, one of the wealthiest men in this town, if I could get my rights. Oh yes, this is a wonderful government, wonderful. Why, looky here. There was a free nigger there from Ohio, a mulatter, most as white as a white man. He had the whitest shirt on you ever see, too, and the shiniest hat, and there ain't a man in that town that's got as fine clothes as what he had, and he had a gold watch and chain, and a silver-headed cane, the awfulest old gray-headed nabob in the state. And what do you think? They said he was a professor in a college, and could talk all kinds of languages, and knowed everything. And that ain't the wust. They said he could vote when he was at home. Well, that let me out. Thinks I, what is the country coming to? It was 'lection day, and I was just about to go and vote myself if I weren't too drunk to get there. But when they told me there was a state in this country where they'd let that nigger vote, I drawed out. I says I'll never vote again. Them's the very words I said. They all heard me, and the country may rot for all me. I'll never vote again as long as I live. And to see the cool way of that nigger. Why, he wouldn't have give me the road if I hadn't shoved him out o' the way. I says to the people, why ain't this nigger put up at auction and sold? That's what I want to know. And what do you reckon they said? Why, they said he couldn't be sold till he'd been in the state 6 months, and he hadn't been there that long yet. There. Now, that's a specimen. They call that a government that can't sell a free nigger till he's been in the state 6 months. Here's a government that calls itself a government, and lets on to be a government, and thinks it is a government, and yet's got to set stock still for 6 whole months before it can take a hold of a prowling, thieving, infernal, white shirt, free nigger, and Pap was a-going on so he never noticed where his old limber legs was taking him to. So he went head over heels over the tub of salt pork and barked both shins, and the rest of his speech was all the hottest kind of language, mostly hove at the nigger and the government, though he give the tub some, too, all along, here and there. He hopped around the cabin considerable, first on one leg and then on the other, holding first one shin and then the other one, and at last he let out with his left foot all of a sudden and fetched the tub a rattling kick. But it warn't good judgment, because that was the boot that had a couple of his toes leaking out of the front end of it. So now he raised a howl that fairly made a body's hair raise, and down he went in the dirt, and rolled there, and held his toes, and the cussing he done then laid over anything he had ever done previous. He said so his own self afterwards. He had heard old Soberry Hagen in his best days, and he said it laid over him, too. But I reckon that was sort of piling it on, maybe. After supper Pap took the jug, and said he had enough whiskey there for 2 drunks and 1 delirium tremens. That was always his word. I judged he would be blind drunk in about an hour, and then I would steal the key, or saw myself out, one or t'other. He drank and tumbled down on his blankets by and by, but luck didn't run my way. He didn't go sound asleep, but was uneasy. He groaned and moaned and thrashed around this way and that for a long time. At last I got so sleepy I couldn't keep my eyes open all I could do, and so before I knowed what I was sound asleep and the candle burning. I don't know how long I was asleep, but all of a sudden there was an awful scream, and I was up. There was Pap looking wild and skipping around every which way and yelling about snakes. He said they was crawling up his legs, and then he would give a jump and scream and say one had bit him on the cheek, but I couldn't see no snakes. He started and run round and round the cabin, hollering, "Take him off! Take him off! He's biting me on the neck." I never see a man look so wild in the eyes. Pretty soon he was all faggied out and fell down panting. Then he rolled over and over wonderful fast, kicking things every which way, and striking and grabbing at the air with his hands, and screaming and saying there was devils a hold of him. He wore out by and by, and laid still a while, moaning. Then he laid stiller, and didn't make a sound. I could hear the owls and the wolves away off in the woods, and it seemed terrible still. He was laying over by the corner. By and by he raised up part way and listened, with his head to one side. He says, very low, "Tramp, tramp, tramp, that's the dead. Tramp, 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 they're coming after me, but I won't go. Oh, they're here. Don't touch me, don't. Hands off, they're cold, let go. Oh, let a poor devil alone." Then he went down on all fours and crawled off, begging them to let him alone, and he rolled himself up in his blanket and wallowed in under the old pine table, still a begging, and then he went a crying. I could hear him through the blanket. By and by he rolled out and jumped up on his feet looking wild, and he see me and went for me. He chased me round and round the place with a clasp knife, calling me the angel of death and saying he would kill me, and then I couldn't come for him no more. I begged and told him I was only Huck, but he laughed such a screechy laugh and roared and cussed and kept on chasing me up. Once when I turned short and dodged under his arm, he made a grab and got me by the jacket between my shoulders, and I thought I was gone, but I slid out of the jacket quick as lightning and saved myself. Pretty soon he was all tired out and dropped down with his back against the door and said he would rest a minute and then kill me. He put his knife under him and said he would sleep and get strong, and then he would see who was who. So he dozed off pretty soon. By and by I got the old split-bottom chair and clumb up as easy as I could, not to make any noise, and got down the gun. I slipped the ramrod down it to make sure it was loaded. Then I laid it across the turnip barrel, pointing towards Pap, and sat down behind it to wait for him to stir. And how slow and still the time did drag along. Chapter 7. Get up. What you bout? I opened my eyes and looked around, trying to make out where I was. It was after sunup, and I had been sound asleep. Pap was standing over me, looking sour and sick, too. He says, "What you doing with this gun?" I judged he didn't know nothing about what he had been doing, so I says, "Somebody tried to get in, so I was laying for him. Why didn't you roust me out?" "Well, I tried to, but I couldn't. I couldn't budge you." "Well, all right. Don't stand there palavering all day, but out with you and see if there's a fish on the lines for breakfast. I'll be along in a minute." He unlocked the door, and I cleared out up the riverbank. I noticed some pieces of limbs and such things floating down, and a sprinkling of bark, so I knowed the river had begun to rise. I reckon I would have great times now if I was over at the town. The June rise used to be always luck for me, because as soon as that rise begins, here comes cordwood floating down and pieces of log rafts, sometimes a dozen logs together, so all you have to do is to catch them and sell them to the woodyards and the sawmill. I went along up the bank with one eye out for Pap and t'other one out for what the rise might fetch along. Well, all at once here comes a canoe, just a beauty, too, about 13 or 14 foot long, riding high like a duck. I shot head first off of the bank like a frog, clothes and all on, and struck out for the canoe. I just expected there'd be somebody laying down in it, because people often done that to fool folks, and when a chap had pulled a skiff out most to it, they'd raise up and laugh at him. But it warn't so this time. It was a drift canoe sure enough, and I clumb in and paddled her ashore. Thinks I, the old man will be glad when he sees this. She's worth $10. But when I got to shore, Pap wasn't in sight yet, and as I was running her into a little creek like a gully, all hung over with vines and willows, I struck another idea. I judged I'd hide her good, and then, instead of taking to the woods when I run off, I'd go down the river about 50 mile and camp in one place for good, and not have such a rough time tramping on foot. It was pretty close to the shanty, and I thought I heard the old man coming all the time, but I got her hid, and then I out and looked around a bunch of willows, and there was the old man down the path a piece, just drawing a bead on a bird with his gun. So he hadn't seen anything. When he got along, I was hard at it taking up a trot line. He abused me a little for being so slow, but I told him I fell in the river, and that was what made me so long. I knowed he would see I was wet, and then he would be asking questions. We got 5 catfish off the lines and went home. While we laid off after breakfast to sleep up, both of us being about wore out, I got to thinking that if I could fix up some way to keep Pap and the widow from trying to follow me, it would be a certainer thing than trusting to luck to get far enough off before they missed me. You see, all kinds of things might happen. Well, I didn't see no way for a while, but by and by Pap raised up a minute to drink another barrel of water, and he says, "Another time a man comes prowling round here, you roust me out, you hear? That man warn't here for no good. I'd a shot him. Next time you roust me out, you hear?" Then he dropped down and went to sleep again, but what he had been saying give me the very idea I wanted. I says to myself, I can fix it now so nobody won't think of following me. About 12 o'clock we turned out and went along up the bank. The river was coming up pretty fast, and lots of driftwood going by on the rise. By and by along comes part of a log raft, 9 logs fast together. We went out with the skiff and towed it ashore. Then we had dinner. Anybody but Pap would have waited and seen the day through, so as to catch more stuff, but that warn't Pap's style. 9 logs was enough for one time. He must shove right over to town and sell. So he locked me in and took the skiff and started off towing the raft about 3:30. I judged he wouldn't come back that night. I waited till I reckoned he had got a good start. Then I out with my saw and went to work on that log again. Before he was t'other side of the river, I was out of the hole. Him and his raft was just a speck on the water away off yonder. I took the sack of cornmeal and took it to where the canoe was hid, and shoved the vines and branches apart and put it in. Then I done the same with the side of bacon, then the whiskey jug. I took all the coffee and sugar there was, and all the ammunition. I took the wadding. I took the bucket and gourd. I took a dipper and a tin cup, and my old saw and 2 blankets, and the skillet and the coffee pot. I took fish lines and matches and other things, everything that was worth a cent. I cleaned out the place. I wanted an axe, but there wasn't any, only the one out at the woodpile, and I knowed why I was going to leave that. I fetched out the gun, and now I was done. I had wore the ground a good deal crawling out of the hole and dragging out so many things. So I fixed that as good as I could from the outside, by scattering dust on the place, which covered up the smoothness and the sawdust. Then I fixed the piece of log back into its place and put 2 rocks under it and one against it to hold it there, for it was bent up at that place and didn't quite touch ground. If you stood 4 or 5 foot away and didn't know it was sawed, you wouldn't never notice it. And besides, this was the back of the cabin, and it warn't likely anybody would go fooling around there. It was all grass clear to the canoe, so I hadn't left a track. I followed around to see. I stood on the bank and looked out over the river. All safe. So I took the gun and went up a piece into the woods, and was hunting around for some birds when I see a wild pig. Hogs soon went wild in them bottoms after they had got away from the prairie farms. I shot this fellow and took him into camp. I took the axe and smashed in the door. I beat it and hacked it. Considerable aid doing it. I fetched the pig in and took him back nearly to the table and hacked into his throat with the axe and laid him down on the ground to bleed. I say ground because it was ground, hard, packed, and no boards. Well, next I took an old sack and put a lot of big rocks in it, all I could drag, and I started it from the pig and dragged it to the door and through the woods down to the river and dumped it in, and down it sunk out of sight. You could easy see that something had been dragged over the ground. I did wish Tom Sawyer was there. I knowed he would take an interest in this kind of business and throw in the fancy touches. Nobody could spread himself like Tom Sawyer in such a thing as that. Well, last I pulled out some of my hair and blooded the axe good and stuck it on the back side and slung the axe in the corner. Then I took up the pig and held him to my breast with my jacket, so he couldn't drip, till I got a good piece below the house and then dumped him into the river. Now I thought of something else, so I went and got the bag of meal and my old saw out of the canoe and fetched them to the house. I took the bag to where it used to stand and ripped a hole in the bottom of it with the saw, for there weren't no knives and forks on the place. Pap done everything with his clasp knife about the cooking. Then I carried the sack about 100 yards across the grass and through the willows east of the house to a shallow lake that was 5 miles wide and full of rushes, and ducks too, you might say, in the season. There was a slough or a creek leading out of it on the other side that went miles away, I don't know where, but it didn't go to the river. The meal sifted out and made a little track all the way to the lake. I dropped Pap's whetstone there too, so as to look like it had been done by accident. Then I tied up the rip in the meal sack with a string, so it wouldn't leak no more, and took it and my saw to the canoe again. It was about dark now, so I dropped the canoe down the river under some willows that hung over the bank and waited for the moon to rise. I made fast to a willow. Then I took a bite to eat, and by laid down in the canoe to smoke a pipe and lay out a plan. I says to myself, they'll follow the track of that sack full of rocks to the shore and then drag the river for me, and they'll follow that meal track to the lake and go browsing down the creek that leads out of it to find the robbers that killed me and took the things. They won't ever hunt the river for anything but my dead carcass. They'll soon get tired of that and won't bother no more about me. All right, I can stop anywhere I want to. Jackson's Island is good enough for me. I know that island pretty well, and nobody ever comes there. And then I can paddle over to town nights and slink around and pick up things I want. Jackson's Island's the place. I was pretty tired, and the first thing I knowed I was asleep. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was for a minute. I sat up and looked around, a little scared. Then I remembered. The river looked miles and miles across. The moon was so bright I could have counted the drift logs that went slipping along, black and still, hundreds of yards out from shore. Everything was dead quiet, and it looked late, and smelt late. You know what I mean? I don't know the words to put it in. I took a good gap and a stretch, and was just going to unhitch and start when I heard a sound away over the water. I listened. Pretty soon, I made it out. It was that dull kind of irregular sound that comes from oars working in rowlocks when it's a still night. I peeped out through the willow branches, and there it was, a skiff, away across the water. I couldn't tell how many was in it. It kept a-coming, and when it was abreast of me, I see there warn't but one man in it. Thinks I, maybe it's Pap, though I warn't expecting him. He dropped below me with the current, and by he came a-swinging up shore in the easy water. And he went by so close I could have reached out the gun and touched him. Well, it was Pap, sure enough, and sober, too, by the way he laid his oars. I didn't lose no time. The next minute I was a-spinning downstream, soft but quick in the shade of the bank. I made 2.5 miles, and then struck out 1/4 mile or more towards the middle of the river, because pretty soon I would be passing the ferry landing, and people might see me and hail me. I got out amongst the driftwood, and then laid down in the bottom of the canoe and let her float. I laid there, and had a good rest and a smoke out of my pipe, looking away into the sky, not a cloud in it. The sky looks ever so deep when you lay down on your back in the moonshine. I never knowed it before. And how far a body can hear on the water such nights. I heard people talking at the ferry landing. I heard what they said, too, every word of it. One man said it was getting towards the long days and the short nights now. T'other one said this warn't one of the short ones, he reckoned, and then they laughed, and he said it over again, and they laughed again. Then they waked up another fellow and told him, and laughed, but he didn't laugh. He ripped out something brisk and said, "Let him alone." The first fellow said he loathed to tell it to his old woman. She would think it was pretty good, but he said that warn't nothing to some things he had said in his time. I heard one man say it was nearly 3 o'clock, and he hoped daylight wouldn't wait more than about a week longer. After that the talk got further and further away, and I couldn't make out the words any more, but I could hear the mumble, and now and then a laugh, too, but it seemed a long ways off. I was away below the ferry now. I rose up, and there was Jackson's Island, about 2.5 miles downstream, heavy-timbered and standing up out of the middle of the river, big and dark and solid, like a steamboat without any lights. There weren't any signs of the bar. At the head, it was all under water now. It didn't take me long to get there. I shot past the head at a ripping rate. The current was so swift, and then I got into the dead water and landed on the side towards the Illinois shore. I run the canoe into a deep dent in the bank that I knowed about. I had to part the willow branches to get in, and when I made fast nobody could have seen the canoe from the outside. I went up and sat down on a log at the head of the island and looked out on the big river and the black driftwood and away over to the town, 3 miles away, where there was 3 or 4 lights twinkling. A monstrous big lumber raft was about a mile upstream, coming along, down, with a lantern in the middle of it. I watched it come creeping down, and when it was most abreast of where I stood, I heard a man say, "Stern oars there. Heave her head to starboard." I heard that just as plain as if the man was by my side. There was a little gray in the sky now, so I stepped into the woods and lay down for a nap before breakfast. Chapter 8. The sun was up so high when I waked that I judged it was after 8 o'clock. I laid there in the grass and the cool shade thinking about things and feeling rested and ruther comfortable and satisfied. I could see the sun out at 1 or 2 holes, but mostly it was big trees all about, and gloomy in there amongst them. There was freckled places on the ground where the light sifted down through the leaves, and the freckled places swapped about a little, showing there was a little breeze up there. A couple of squirrels sat on a limb and jabbered at me. Very friendly. I was powerful lazy and comfortable. Didn't want to get up and cook breakfast. Well, I was dozing off again when I thinks I hears a deep sound of boom, away up the river. I rouses up and rests on my elbow and listens. Pretty soon I hears it again. I hopped up and went and looked out at a hole in the leaves, and I see a bunch of smoke laying on the water a long ways up, about abreast the ferry. And there was the ferry boat full of people floating along down. I knowed what was the matter now. Boom. I see the white smoke squirt out of the ferry boat's side. You see, they was firing cannon over the water, trying to make my carcass come to the top. I was pretty hungry, but it weren't going to do for me to start a fire, because they might see the smoke. So I sat there and watched the cannon smoke and listened to the boom. The river was a mile wide there, and it always looks pretty on a summer morning, so I was having a good enough time seeing them hunt for my remainders if I only had a bite to eat. Well, then I happened to think how they always put quicksilver in loaves of bread and float them off, because they always go right to the drowned dead carcass and stop there. So, says I'll keep a lookout, and if any of them's floating around after me, I'll give them a show. I changed to the Illinois edge of the island to see what luck I could have, and I weren't disappointed. A big double loaf come along, and I most got it with a long stick, but my foot slipped and she floated out further. Of course I was where the current set in the closest to the shore. I knowed enough for that. But by and by along comes another one, and this time I won. I took out the plug and shook out the little dab of quicksilver and set my teeth in. It was baker's bread, what the quality eat, none of your low-down corn pone. I got a good place amongst the leaves and sat there on a log, munching the bread and watching the ferry boat, and very well satisfied. And then something struck me. I says, now I reckon the widow or the parson or somebody prayed that this bread would find me, and here it has gone and done it. So there ain't no doubt, but there is something in that thing. That is, there's something in it when a body like the widow or the parson prays, but it don't work for me, and I reckon it don't work for only just the right kind. I lit a pipe and had a good long smoke and went on watching. The ferry boat was floating with the current, and I allowed I'd have a chance to see who was aboard when she come along, because she would, coming close, where the bread did. When she'd got pretty well along, down towards me, I put out my pipe and went to where I fished out the bread and laid down behind a log on the bank in a little open place. Where the log forked I could peep through. By and by she come along, and she drifted in so close that they could run out a plank and walked ashore. Most everybody was on the boat. Pap, and Judge Thatcher, and Bessie Thatcher, and Joe Harper, and Tom Sawyer, and his old Aunt Polly, and Sid and Mary, and plenty more. Everybody was talking about the murder, but the captain broke in and says, look sharp, now, the current sets in the closest here, and maybe he's washed ashore and got tangled amongst the brush at the water's edge. I hope so anyway. I didn't hope so. They all crowded up and leaned over the rails, nearly in my face, and kept still, watching with all their might. I could see them first rate, but they couldn't see me. Then the captain sung out, stand away, and the cannon let off such a blast right before me that it made me deaf with the noise and pretty near blind with the smoke, and I judged I was gone. If they'd a had some bullets in, I reckon, they'd a got the corpse they was after. Well, I see I weren't hurt. Thanks to goodness. The boat floated on and went out of sight around the shoulder of the island. I could hear the booming now and then, further and further off, and by, after an hour, I didn't hear it. No more. The island was 3 miles long. I judged they had got to the foot and was giving it up. But they didn't yet a while. They turned around the foot of the island and started up the channel on the Missouri side, under steam, and booming once in a while as they went. I crossed over to that side and watched them. When they got abreast the head of the island, they quit shooting and dropped over to the Missouri shore and went home to the town. I knowed I was all right now. Nobody else would come hunting after me. I got my traps out of the canoe and made me a nice camp in the thick woods. I made a kind of a tent out of my blankets to put my things under so the rain couldn't get at them. I catched a catfish and haggled them open with my saw, and towards sundown I started my camp fire and had supper. Then I set out a line to catch some fish for breakfast. When it was dark, I sat by my campfire smoking and feeling pretty well satisfied, but by and by it got sort of lonesome, and so I went and sat on the bank and listened to the current swashing along and counted the stars and drift logs and rafts that come down, and then went to bed. There ain't no better way to put in time when you are lonesome. You can't stay so, you soon get over it. And so for 3 days and nights. No difference, just the same thing. But the next day, I went exploring around down through the island. I was boss of it. It all belonged to me, so to say, and I wanted to know all about it, but mainly I wanted to put in the time. I found plenty. Strawberries, ripe and prime, and green summer grapes, and green raspberries, and the green blackberries was just beginning to show. They would all come handy by and by, I judged. Well, I went fooling along in the deep woods till I judged I warn't far from the foot of the island. I had my gun along, but I hadn't shot. Nothing. It was for protection. Thought I would kill some game nigh home. About this time I mighty near stepped on a good-sized snake, and it went sliding off through the grass and flowers, and I after it, trying to get a shot at it. I clipped along, and all of a sudden I bounded right on to the ashes of a campfire that was still smoking. My heart jumped up amongst my lungs. I never waited for to look further, but uncocked my gun and went sneaking back on my tiptoes as fast as ever I could. Every now and then I stopped a second amongst the thick leaves and listened, but my breath come so hard I couldn't hear nothing else. I slunk along another piece further, then listened again, and so on, and so on. If I see a stump, I took it for a man. If I trod on a stick and broke it, it made me feel like a person had cut one of my breaths in two, and I only got half, and the short half, too. When I got to camp, I warn't feeling very brash. There warn't much sand in my craw, but I says, this ain't no time to be fooling around. So I got all my traps into my canoe again so as to have them out of sight, and I put out the fire and scattered the ashes around to look like an old last year's camp, and then clumb a tree. I reckon I was up in the tree 2 hours, but I didn't see nothing. I didn't hear nothing. I only thought I heard and seen as much as 1,000 things. Well, I couldn't stay up there forever, so at last I got down, but I kept in the thick woods and on the lookout all the time. All I could get to eat was berries and what was left over from breakfast. By the time it was night, I was pretty hungry. So when it was good and dark, I slid out from shore before moonrise and paddled over to the Illinois bank, about 1/4 of a mile. I went out in the woods and cooked a supper, and I had about made up my mind I would stay there all night when I hear a pluckety-plunk, and says to myself, horses coming, and next I hear people's voices. I got everything into the canoe as quick as I could, and then went creeping through the woods to see what I could find out. I hadn't got far when I hear a man say, we better camp here if we can find a good place. The horses is about beat out. Let's look around. I didn't wait, but shoved out and paddled away easy. I tied up in the old place and reckoned I would sleep in the canoe. I didn't sleep much. I couldn't, somehow, for thinking. And every time I waked up I thought somebody had me by the neck. So the sleep didn't do me no good. By and by I says to myself, I can't live this way. I'm going to find out who it is that's here on the island with me. I'll find it out or bust. Well, I felt better right off. So I took my paddle and slid out from shore just a step or two, and then let the canoe drop along down amongst the shadows. The moon was shining, and outside of the shadows it made it most as light as day. I poked along well on to an hour, everything still as rocks and sound. Asleep. Well, by this time I was most down to the foot of the island. A little ripply, cool breeze begun to blow, and that was as good as saying the night was about done. I give her a turn with the paddle and brung her nose to shore. Then I got my gun and slipped out and into the edge of the woods. I sat down there on a log and looked out through the leaves. I see the moon go off watch, and the darkness begin to blanket the river. But in a little while I see a pale streak over the treetops, and knowed the day was coming. So I took my gun and slipped off towards where I had run across that campfire, stopping every minute or two to listen. But I had no luck somehow. I couldn't seem to find the place. But by and by, sure enough, I catched a glimpse of fire away through the trees. I went for it, cautious and slow. By and by I was close enough to have a look, and there laid a man on the ground. It most give me the fantods. He had a blanket around his head, and his head was nearly in the fire. I sat there behind a clump of bushes, in about 6 foot of him, and kept my eyes on him steady. It was getting gray daylight now. Pretty soon he gasped and stretched himself and hove off the blanket, and it was Miss Watson's Jim. I bet I was glad to see him. I says, "Hello, Jim," and skipped out. He bounced up and stared at me wild. Then he drops down on his knees and puts his hands together and says, "Don't hurt me, don't. I hain't ever done no harm to a ghost. I always liked dead people and done all I could for 'em. You go and get into river agin, why you belongs, and don't do nuffin to old Jim at Uzi. All's yo friend." Well, I warn't long making him understand I warn't dead. I was ever so glad to see Jim. I warn't lonesome now. I told him I warn't afraid of him telling the people where I was. I talked along, but he only sat there and looked at me, never said nothing. Then I says, "It's good daylight. Please get breakfast. Make up your campfire good. What's the use making up the campfire to cook strawberries in sich truck? But you got a gun, hain't you? Den we can get something better den strawberries. Strawberries in such truck," I says. "Is that what you live on?" "I couldn't get nothing else," he says. "Why, how long you been on the island, Jim?" "I come here tonight arter you's killed." "What, all that time?" "Yes, indeedy." "And ain't you had nothing but that kind of rubbish to eat?" "No, saw, nothing else." "Well, you must be most starved, ain't you?" "I reckon I could eat a hoss." "I think I could. How long you been on the island?" "Since the night I got killed." "No. Why, what is you lived on?" "But you got a gun." "Oh, yes, you got a gun. That's good. Now you kill something, and I'll make up the fire." So we went over to where the canoe was, and while he built a fire in a grassy open place amongst the trees, I fetched meal and bacon and coffee pot and frying pan and sugar in tin cups, and the nigger was set back considerable, because he reckoned it was all done with witchcraft. I catched a good big catfish, too, and Jim cleaned him with his knife and fried him. When breakfast was ready we lolled on the grass and eat it smoking hot. Jim laid it in with all his might, for he was most about starved. Then, when we had got pretty well stuffed, we laid off and lazied. By and by, Jim says, "But looky here, Huck, who was it dat Uzi killed in dat shanty yeffet? Weren't you?" Then I told him the whole thing, and he said it was smart. He said Tom Sawyer couldn't get up no better plan than what I had. Then I says, "How do you come to be here, Jim, and how'd you get here?" He looked pretty uneasy and didn't say nothing for a minute. Then he says, "Maybe I better not tell." "Why, Jim?" "Well, day's reasons." "But you wouldn't tell on me yef I usey to tell you. Would you, Huck?" "Blamed if I would, Jim." "Well, I believe you, Huck. I run off." "Jim, but mind, you said you wouldn't tell." "You know you said you would." "Tell, Huck." "Well, I did. I said I wouldn't, and I'll stick to it. Honest Injun, I will. People would call me a low-down abolitionist and despise me for keeping mum, but that don't make no difference. I ain't going to tell, and I ain't going back there anyways. So, now lees know all about it. Well, you see, it usey dis way. Ol' missus, that's Miss Watson, she pecks on me all the time and treats me pooty rough, but she allus said she wouldn't sell me down to Orleans. But I noticed dey was a nigger trader. Ruined a place considerable lately, and I begin to get uneasy. Well, one night I creeps to de do pooty late, and de do warn't quite shet, and I hear old missus tell the widder she gwine to sell me down to Orleans. But she didn't want to, but she could get $800 for me. and it usey sich a big stack o' money she couldn't resis. De witter she. Try to get her to say she wouldn't do it, but I never waited to hear da. Res. I lit out mighty quick, I tell you. I tuck out and shin down de hill, and spec to steal a skift long da. Show sommers, bove de town, but dey was people a-stirring yet, so I hid. In de old tumble-down cooper shop on de bank to wait for everybody to go away. Well, I was da all night. Dey was somebody ruin all de time. Long 'bout 6 in de morning skiffs begin to go by, in 'bout 8 or 9 every skiff dat went long was talkin' 'bout how yo pap come over to de town and say you's killed. Dese lost skiffs was full o' ladies on. Gentlemen a-goin' over for to see de place. Sometimes dey'd pull up at da show and take a res BFO day started across, so by de talk I got to know all about de killin'. I usey powerful sorry you's killed, Huck, but I ain't no mo now. I lay da under de shavins all day. I usey hungry, but I warn't afeard, becase I knowed ol' missus in de witter was goin' to start too. De camp meet and right arter breakfast and be gone all day, and dey knows. I goes off wid de cattle 'bout daylight, so dey wouldn't 'spect to see me. Ruined de place, and so dey would miss me tell arter dark in de evenin'. De yuther servants wouldn't miss me, kase dey'd shin out on take holidays soon as de ol' folks usey out in de way. Well, when it come dark, I tuck out up de river road, and went 'bout 2 mile or more to wha dey warn't no houses. I'd made up my mind 'bout what I's a-gwine to do. You see, yef I kep on tryin' to get away afoot. De dogs ud track me. Yef I stole a skiff to cross over, dey'd miss dat skift, you see, and dey'd know 'bout wha I'd lawn on de yuther side and what to pick up my track. So I says, a raft is what I's arter, it don't make no track. I see a light a-comin' roon de peant bimeby, so I wade in and shove. A log ahead o' me and swum more in halfway across de river, and got in 'mongst de driftwood, and kept my head down low, and kinder swum agin da current till de raft come along. Den I swum to de stern uv it and tuck a holt. It clouded up and usey pooty dark for a little while, so I clum up and laid down on de planks. De men usey all way yonder in de middle. What a lantern was. De river was a risin', and day was a good current. So I reckon d at by FO in de morning I'd be 25 mile down de river, and den I'd slip and jest BFO daylight and swim asho and take to de woods on de Illinois side. But I didn't have no luck. When we usey mows down to de head er de island, a man begin to come aft wid de lantern. I see it warn't no use. Fair to wait. So I slid overboard and struck out fair to island. Well, I had a notion I could lawn mows anywheres, but I couldn't. Bank too bluff. I usey mows to de foot de island BFO. I found a good place. I went into de woods and jeget I wouldn't fool wid rafts no mo long as day. Moved a lantern roon so. I had my pipe and a plugger dogleg and some matches in my cap, and dey warn't wet, so I usey all right. And so you ain't had no meat nor bread to eat all this time? Why, didn't you get mudticles? How you gwine to get 'em? You can't slip up on 'em and grab 'em. In house, a body gwine to hit 'em wid a rock. How could a body do it in de night? And I warn't gwine to show myself on de bank in de daytime. Well, that's so. You've had to keep in the woods all the time, of course. Did you hear him shooting the cannon? Oh, yes. I know day was arter you. I see him go by here, watched 'em. Though de bushes. Some young birds come along, flying a yard or two at a time, and lighting. Jim said it was a sign it was going to rain. He said it was a sign when young chickens flew that way, and so he reckoned it was the same way when young birds done it. I was going to catch some of them, but Jim wouldn't let me. He said it was death. He said his father laid mighty sick once, and some of them catched a bird, and his old granny said his father would die, and he did. And Jim said you mustn't count the things you were going to cook for dinner, because that would bring bad luck. The same if you shook the tablecloth after sundown. And he said if a man owned a beehive and that man died, the bees must be told about it before sunup next morning, or else the bees would all weaken down and quit work and die. Jim said bees wouldn't sting idiots, but I didn't believe that because I had tried them lots of times myself, and they wouldn't sting me. I had heard about some of these things before, but not all of them. Jim knowed all kinds of signs. He said he knowed most everything. I said it. Looked to me like all the signs was about bad luck, and so I asked him if there weren't any good luck signs. He says, mighty few, and they ain't no use to a body. What you want to know? When good luck say comin' for? Want to keep it off? And he said, yef. You's got hairy arms and a hairy brayas. It's a sign that you's a gwine to be rich. Well, dey's some use in a sign like dat, 'case it's so fur ahead. You see, maybe you's got to be pull a long time fust, and so you might get discouraged and kill yo sef if you didn't know by the sign dat you gwine to be rich bimeby. Have you got hairy arms and a hairy breast, Jim? What's the use to ask that question? Don't you see I has? Well, are you rich? No, but I been rich once, and gwine to be rich again. Once I had $14, but I tucked to speculatin and got busted out. What did you speculate in, Jim? Well, first I tackled stock. What kind of stock? Why, livestock, cattle, you know. I put $10 in a cow, but I'm gwine to resk no mo money in stock. The cow up and died on my hands. So you lost the $10. No, I didn't lose it all. I only lost 'bout 9 of it. I sold a hide in taller for $1.10. You had $5.10 left. Did you speculate any more? Yes. You know that one-leg nigger dat belongs to old Misto Bradish? Well, he sot up a bank, and say anybody dat put in $1 would get $FO mo at the end of the year. Well, all the niggers went in, but they didn't have much. I was the only one that had much. So I stuck out for mo dan $FO, and I said if I didn't get it I'd start a bank myself. Well, o' course that nigger want to keep me outer the business, because he says they warn't business enough for 2 banks. So he say I could put in my $5, and he pay me $35 at the end of the year. So I done it. Den I reckon I'd envies the $35 right. Often keep things a-movin'. Dey was a nigger named Bob that had catched a wood flat, and his marster didn't know it, and I bought it off in. Him and told him to take the $35 when to enter the year. Come, but somebody stole the wood flat that night, and next day the one-leg nigger say the bank's busted. So they didn't none us get no money. What did you do with the 10 cents, Jim? Well, I usually gwine to spend it, but I had a dream, and the dream told me to give it to a nigger named Balaam. Balaam's as they call him for short. He's one of dem chuckleheads, you know. But he's lucky, they say, and I warn't lucky. The dream say let Balaam envies the 10 cents and he'd make a raise for me. Well, Balaam he tucked the money, and when he was in church he heard the preacher say dat whoever give to the palin to the Lord, and bound to get his money back 100 times. So Balaam he tuck, and give the 10 cents to the pa, and laid low to see what was gwine to come of it. Well, what did come of it, Jim? Nuff never come of it. I couldn't manage to collect dat money no way. In Balaam he couldn't. I ain't gwine to lend no mo money dat I see da security. Bound to get yo money back 100 times, the preacher says. If I could get the 10 cents back, I'd call it squaw, and be gladder da chanced. Well, it's all right anyway, Jim, long as you're going to be rich. Again some time or other. Yes, and I's rich now, come to look at it. I owns myself, and I's worth $800. I wished I had the money. I wouldn't want no mo. Chapter 9. I wanted to go and look at a place right about the middle of the island that I'd found when I was exploring, so we started and soon got to it. Because the island was only 3 miles long and 1/4 of a mile wide. This place was a tolerable long, steep hill or ridge about 40 foot high. We had a rough time getting to the top. The sides was so steep, and the bushes so thick. We tramped and clumb around all over it, and by found a good big cavern in the rock, most up to the top on the side towards Illinois. The cavern was as big as 2 or 3 rooms, bunched together, and Jim could stand up straight in it. It was cool in there. Jim was for putting our traps in there right away, but I said we didn't want to be climbing up and down there all the time. Jim said if we had the canoe hid in a good place and had all the traps in the cavern, we could rush there if anybody was to come to the island, and they would never find us without dogs. And besides, he said them little birds had said it was going to rain, and did I want the things to get wet? So we went back and got the canoe and paddled up abreast the cavern and lugged all the traps up there. Then we hunted up a place close by to hide the canoe in amongst the thick willows. We took some fish off of the lines and set them again and begun to get ready for dinner. The door of the cavern was big enough to roll a hogshead in, and on one side of the door the floor stuck out a little bit and was flat and a good place to build a fire on. So we built it there and cooked dinner. We spread the blankets inside for a carpet and eat our dinner in there. We put all the other things handy at the back of the cavern. Pretty soon it darkened up and begun to thunder and lighten, so the birds was right about it. Directly it begun to rain, and it rained like all fury, too, and I never see the wind blow so. It was one of these regular summer storms. It would get so dark that it looked all blue-black outside, and lovely, and the rain would thrash along by so thick that the trees off a little ways looked dim and spider-webby, and here would come a blast of wind that would bend the trees down and turn up the pale underside of the leaves, and then a perfect ripper of a gust would follow along and set the branches to tossing their arms as if they was just wild, and next, when it was just about the bluest and blackest FST, it was as bright as glory, and you'd have a little glimpse of treetops plunging about away off yonder in the storm, hundreds of yards further than you could see before, dark as sin again, in a second, and now you'd hear the thunder let go with an awful crash, and then go rumbling, grumbling, tumbling down the sky towards the underside of the world, like rolling empty barrels downstairs, where it's long stairs and they bounce a good deal, you know. Jim, this is nice, I says. I wouldn't want to be nowhere else but here. Pass me along another hunk of fish and some hot cornbread. Well, you wouldn't have been here if it hadn't have been for Jim. You'd have been down in de woods without any dinner, and getting most drowned dead, too. That you would, honey. Chickens knows when it's gwine to rain, and so do the birds, chilly. The river went on raising and raising for 10 or 12 days, till at last it was over the banks. The water was 3 or 4 foot deep on the island in the low places and on the Illinois bottom. On that side, it was a good many miles wide, but on the Missouri side it was the same old distance across, a half a mile, because the Missouri shore was just a wall of high bluffs. Daytimes we paddled all over the island in the canoe. It was mighty cool and shady in the deep woods, even if the sun was blazing outside. We went winding in and out amongst the trees, and sometimes the vines hung so thick we had to back away and go some other way. Well, on every old broken-down tree you could see rabbits and snakes and such things. And when the island had been overflowed a day or two, they got so tame, on account of being hungry, that you could paddle right up and put your hand on them if you wanted to, but not the snakes and turtles. They would slide off in the water. The ridge our cavern was in was full of them. We could have had pets enough if we'd wanted them. One night we cached a little section of a lumber raft, nice pine planks. It was 12 foot wide and about 15 or 16 foot long, and the top stood above water 6 or 7 inches, a solid, level floor. We could see sawlogs go by in the daylight sometimes, but we let them go. We didn't show ourselves in daylight. Another night, when we was up at the head of the island, just before daylight, here comes a frame house down on the west side. She was a 2-story and tilted over considerable. We paddled out and got aboard, clumb in at an upstairs window, but it was too dark to see yet. So we made the canoe fast and set in her to wait for daylight. The light begun to come before we got to the foot of the island. Then, we looked in at the window. We could make out a bed, and a table, and 2 old chairs, and lots of things around about on the floor, and there was clothes hanging against the wall. There was something laying on the floor in the far corner that looked like a man. So Jim says, "Hello, you." But it didn't budge. So I hollered again, and then Jim says, "The man ain't asleep, he's dead. You hold still, I'll go and see." He went, and bent down and looked, and says, "It's a dead man. Yes, indeedy, naked, too. He's been shot in the back. I reckon he's been dead 2 or 3 days. Come in, Huck, but don't look at his face, it's too gashly." I didn't look at him at all. Jim throwed some old rags over him, but he needn't done it. I didn't want to see him. There was heaps of old, greasy cards scattered around over the floor, and old whiskey bottles, and a couple of masks made out of black cloth, and all over the walls was the ignorantest kind of words and pictures made with charcoal. There was 2 old dirty calico dresses, and a sunbonnet, and some women's underclothes hanging against the wall, and some men's clothing, too. We put the lot into the canoe. It might come good. There was a boy's old speckled straw hat on the floor. I took that, too. And there was a bottle that had milk in it, and it had a rag stopper for a baby to suck. We would have took the bottle, but it was broke. There was a seedy old chest, and an old hair trunk with the hinges broke. They stood open, but there warn't nothing left in them that was any account. The way things was scattered about, we reckoned the people left in a hurry and weren't fixed so as to carry off most of their stuff. We got an old tin lantern and a butcher knife without any handle, and a brand new Barlow knife worth 2 bits in any store, and a lot of tallow candles, and a tin candlestick, and a gourd, and a tin cup, and a ratty old bed quilt off the bed, and a reticule with needles and pins, and beeswax and buttons and thread and all such truck in it, and a hatchet and some nails, and a fish line as thick as my little finger, with some monstrous hooks on it, and a roll of buckskin, and a leather dog collar, and a horseshoe, and some vials of medicine that didn't have no label on them. And just as we was leaving, I found a tolerable good curry comb, and Jim he found a ratty old fiddle bow, and a wooden leg. The straps was broke off of it, but, barring that, it was a good enough leg, though it was too long for me and not long enough for Jim. And we couldn't find the other one, though we hunted all around. And so, take it all around, we made a good haul. When we was ready to shove off, we was a 1/4 of a mile below the island, and it was pretty broad day. So I made Jim lay down in the canoe and cover up with the quilt, because if he set up, people could tell he was a nigger a good ways off. I paddled over to the Illinois shore and drifted down, most a half a mile doing it. I crept up the dead water under the bank, and hadn't no accidents and didn't see nobody. We got home all safe. Chapter 10. After breakfast, I wanted to talk about the dead man and guess out how he come to be killed, but Jim didn't want to. He said it would fetch bad luck, and besides, he said, he might come and hunt us. He said a man that warn't buried was more likely to go a hunting around than one that was planted and comfortable. That sounded pretty reasonable, so I didn't say no more, but I couldn't keep from studying over it and wishing I knowed who shot the man and what they done it for. We rummaged the clothes we'd got and found $8 in silver, sewed up in the lining of an old blanket overcoat. Jim said he reckoned the people in that house stole the coat, because if they'd knowed the money was there, they wouldn't have left it. I said I reckoned they killed him, too, but Jim didn't want to talk about that. I says, "Now you think it's bad luck, but what did you say when I fetched in the snake skin that I found on the top of the ridge day before yesterday? You said it was the worst bad luck in the world to touch a snakeskin with my hands. Well, here's your bad luck. We've raked in all this truck and $8 besides. I wish we could have some bad luck like this every day, Jim." "Never you mind, honey, never you mind. Don't you get too pert. It's a comin'. Mind I tell you, it's a comin'. It did come, too. It was a Tuesday that we had that talk. Well, after dinner Friday, we was laying around in the grass at the upper end of the ridge and got out of tobacco. I went to the cavern to get some and found a rattlesnake in there. I killed him and curled him up on the foot of Jim's blanket, ever so natural, thinking there'd be some fun. When Jim found him there, well, by night I forgot all about the snake. And when Jim flung himself down on the blanket while I struck a light, the snake's mate was there and bit him. He jumped up yelling, and the first thing the light showed was the varmint curled up and ready for another spring. I laid him out in a second with a stick, and Jim grabbed Pap's whiskey jug and begun to pour it down. He was barefooted, and the snake bit him right on the heel. That all comes of my being such a fool as to not remember that wherever you leave a dead snake, its mate always comes there and curls around it. Jim told me to chop off the snake's head and throw it away, and then skin the body and roast a piece of it. I done it, and he eat it and said it would help cure him. He made me take off the rattles and tie them around his wrist, too. He said that would help. Then I slid out, quiet, and throwed the snakes clear away amongst the bushes, for I weren't going to let Jim find out it was all my fault, not if I could help it. Jim sucked and sucked at the jug, and now and then he got out of his head and pitched around and yelled. But every time he come to himself, he went to sucking at the jug again. His foot swelled up pretty big, and so did his leg, but by and by the drunk begun to come, and so I judged he was all right. But I'd druther been bit with a snake than Pap's whiskey. Jim was laid up for 4 days and nights. Then the swelling was all gone, and he was around again. I made up my mind I would never take a holt of a snake skin again with my hands, now that I see what had come of it. Jim said he reckoned I would believe him next time, and he said that handling a snake skin was such awful bad luck that maybe we hadn't got to the end of it yet. He said he drew there see the new moon over his left shoulder as much as 1,000 times than take up a snake skin in his hand. Well, I was getting to feel that way myself, though I've always reckoned that looking at the new moon over your left shoulder is one of the carelessest and foolishest things a body can do. Old Hank Bunker done it once and bragged about it, and in less than 2 years he got drunk and fell off of the shot tower and spread himself out so that he was just a kind of a layer, as you may say, and they slid him edgeways between 2 barn doors for a coffin and buried him so they say, but I didn't see it. Pap told me. But anyway, it all come of looking at the moon that way, like a fool. Well, the days went along, and the river went down between its banks again, and about the first thing we done was to bait one of the big hooks with a skinned rabbit and set it and catch a catfish that was as big as a man, being 6 foot 2 inches long and weighed over 200 pounds. We couldn't handle him. Of course, he would have flung us into Illinois. We just sat there and watched him rip and tear around till he drowned dead. We found a brass button in his stomach and a round ball and lots of rubbish. We split the ball open with the hatchet, and there was a spool in it. Jim said he'd had it there a long time, to coat it over so and make a ball of it. It was as big a fish as was ever catched in the Mississippi, I reckon. Jim said he hadn't ever seen a bigger one. He would have been worth a good deal over at the village. They peddle out such a fish as that by the pound in the market house there. Everybody buys some of him. His meat's as white as snow and makes a good fry. Next morning I said it was getting slow and dull, and I wanted to get a stirring up some way. I said I reckoned I would slip over the river and find out what was going on. Jim liked that notion, but he said I must go in the dark and look sharp. Then he studied it over and said, couldn't I put on some of them old things and dress up like a girl? That was a good notion, too. So we shortened up one of the calico gowns, and I turned up my trouser legs to my knees and got into it. Jim hitched it behind with the hooks, and it was a fair fit. I put on the sunbonnet and tied it under my chin, and then for a body to look in and see my face was like looking down a joint of stovepipe. Jim said, nobody would know me, even in the daytime. Hardly. I practiced around all day to get the hang of the things, and by I could do pretty well in them. Only Jim said I didn't walk like a girl, and he said I must quit pulling up my gown to get at my breeches pocket. I took notice and done better. I started up the Illinois shore in the canoe just after dark. I started across to the town from a little below the ferry landing, and the drift of the current fetched me in at the bottom of the town. I tied up and started along the bank. There was a light burning in a little shanty that hadn't been lived in for a long time, and I wondered who had took up quarters there. I slipped up and peeped in at the window. There was a woman about 40-year-old in there knitting by a candle that was on a pine table. I didn't know her face. She was a stranger, for you couldn't start a face in that town that I didn't know. Now this was lucky, because I was weakening. I was getting afraid. I had come. People might know my voice and find me out. But if this woman had been in such a little town 2 days, she could tell me all I wanted to know. So I knocked at the door and made up my mind I wouldn't forget I was a girl. Chapter 11. Come in, says the woman, and I did. She says, take a cheer. I done it. She looked me all over with her little shiny eyes and says, what might your name be? Sarah Williams. Whereabouts do you live? In this neighborhood. No, in Hookerville, 7 miles below. I've walked all the way and I'm all tired out. Hungry too, I reckon. I'll find you something. No, I ain't hungry. I was so hungry I had to stop 2 miles below, here at a farm, so I ain't hungry no more. It's what makes me so late. My mother's down sick and out of money and everything, and I come to tell my Uncle Abner more. He lives at the upper end of the town, she says. I ain't ever been here before. Do you know him? No, but I don't know everybody yet. I haven't lived here quite 2 weeks. It's a considerable ways to the upper end of the town. You better stay here all night. Take off your bonnet. No, I says. I'll rest a while, I reckon, and go on. I ain't afeard of the dark. She said she wouldn't let me go by myself, but her husband would be in by and by, maybe in an hour and a half, and she'd send him along with me. Then she got to talking about her husband and about her relations up the river and her relations down the river and about how much better off they used to was, and how they didn't know but they'd made a mistake coming to our town, instead of letting well alone, and so on, till I was afeard I had made a mistake coming to her to find out what was going on in the town. But by and by she dropped onto Pap and the murder, and then I was pretty willing to let her clatter right along. She told about me and Tom Sawyer finding the $6,000, only she got it 10, and all about Pap and what a hard lot he was, and what a hard lot I was, and at last she got down to where I was murdered. I says, who done it? We've heard considerable about these goings-on down in Hookerville, but we don't know who 'twas that killed Huck Finn. Well, I reckon there's a right smart chance of people here that'd like to know who killed him. Some think old Finn done it himself. No, is that so? Most everybody thought it at first. He'll never know how nigh he come to getting lynched. But before night they changed around and judged it was done by a runaway nigger named Jim. Why he? I stopped. I reckon I better keep still. She run on, and never noticed I had put in at all. The nigger run off the very night Huck Finn was killed. So there's a reward out for him, $300. And there's a reward out for old Finn, too, $200. You see, he come to town the morning after the murder and told about it, and was out with M on the ferryboat hunt, and right away after he up and left. Before night they wanted to lynch him, but he was gone, you see. Well, next day they found out the nigger was gone. They found out he hadn't been seen since 10 o'clock the night the murder was done. So then they put it on him, you see, and while they was full of it, next day, back comes old Finn, and went boo-hooing to Judge Thatcher to get money to hunt for the nigger all over Illinois with. The judge gave him some, and that evening he got drunk, and was around till after midnight with a couple of mighty hard-looking strangers, and then went off with them. Well, he ain't come back since, and they ain't looking for him back till this thing blows over a little, for people thinks now that he killed his boy, and fixed things so folks would think robbers done it, and then he'd get Huck's money without having to bother a long time with a lawsuit. People do say he warn't any too good to do it. Oh, he's sly, I reckon. If you don't come back for a year, he'll be all right. You can't prove anything on him, you know. Everything will be quieted down then, and he'll walk in Huck's money as easy as nothing. Yes, I reckon so, I don't see nothing in the way of it. Has everybody quit thinking the nigger done it? Oh no, not everybody. A good many thinks he done it. But they'll get the nigger pretty soon now, and maybe they can scare it out of him. Why? Are they after him yet? Well, you're innocent, ain't you? Does $300 lay around every day for people to pick up? Some folks think the nigger ain't far from here. I'm one of them, but I hain't talked it around. Hey, few days ago, I was talking with an old couple that lives next door in the log shanty, and they happened to say hardly anybody ever goes to that island over yonder that they call Jackson's Island. Don't anybody live there? Says I. No, nobody, says they. I didn't say any more, but I done some thinking. I was pretty near certain I'd seen smoke over there, about the head of the island, a day or two before that, so I says to myself, like as not that nigger's hiding over there. Anyway, says I, it's worth the trouble to give the place a hunt. I hain't seen any smoke since, so I reckon maybe he's gone, if it was him. But husband's going over to see him and another man. He was gone up the river, but he got back today, and I told him as soon as he got here. 2 hours ago. I had got so uneasy I couldn't sit still. I had to do something with my hands, so I took up a needle off of the table and went to threading it. My hands shook, and I was making a bad job of it. When the woman stopped talking, I looked up, and she was looking at me pretty curious and smiling a little. I put down the needle and thread and let on to be interested, and I was, too, and says, $300 is a power of money. I wish my mother could get it. Is your husband going over there tonight? Oh, yes. He went uptown with the man I was telling you of to get a boat and see if they could borrow another gun. They'll go over after midnight. Couldn't they see better if they was to wait till daytime? Yes. And couldn't the niggers see better, too? After midnight he'll likely be asleep, and they can slip around through the woods and hunt up his campfire, all the better for the dark, if he's got one. I didn't think of that. The woman kept looking at me pretty curious, and I didn't feel a bit comfortable. Pretty soon she says, "What did you say your name was, honey?" Mary Williams. Somehow it didn't seem to me that I said it was Mary before, so I didn't look up. Seemed to me I said it was Sarah, so I felt sort of cornered, and was afeared maybe I was looking it, too. I wished the woman would say something more. The longer she sat still, the uneasier I was. But now she says, "Honey, I thought you said it was Sarah when you first come in." "Oh, yes'm, I did. Sarah Mary Williams. Sarah's my first name. Some calls me Sarah, some calls me Mary." "Oh, that's the way of it." "Yes'm." I was feeling better then, but I wished I was out of there anyway. I couldn't look up yet. Well, the woman fell to talking about how hard times was, and how poor they had to live, and how the rats was as free as if they owned the place, and so forth and so on, and then I got easy again. She was right about the rats. You'd see one stick his nose out of a hole in the corner every little while. She said she had to have things handy to throw at them when she was alone, or they wouldn't give her no peace. She showed me a bar of lead twisted up into a knot, and said she was a good shot with it generally, but she'd wrenched her arm a day or two ago, and didn't know whether she could throw true now. But she watched for a chance, and directly banged away at a rat, but she missed him wide, and said ouch, it hurt her arm so. Then she told me to try for the next one. I wanted to be getting away before the old man got back, but of course I didn't let on. I got the thing, and the first rat that showed his nose I let drive, and if he'd a stayed where he was he'd a been a tolerable sick rat. She said that was first rate, and she reckoned I would hive the next one. She went and got the lump of lead and fetched it back, and brought along a hank of yarn which she wanted me to help her with. I held up my 2 hands, and she put the hank over them, and went on talking about her and her husband's matters. But she broke off to say, "Keep your eye on the rats. You better have the lead in your lap. Handy." So she dropped the lump into my lap just at that moment, and I clapped my legs together on it, and she went on talking, but only about a minute. Then she took off the hank and looked me straight in the face, and very pleasant, and says, "Come, now what's your real name?" "WH, what, Mum? What's your real name? Is it Bill or Tom or Bob? Or what is it?" I reckon I shook like a leaf, and I didn't know hardly what to do. "But," I says, "please to don't poke fun at a poor girl like me, Mum. If I'm in the way here, I'll—" "No, you won't. Set down and stay where you are. I ain't going to hurt you, and I ain't going to tell on you, nother. You just tell me your secret, and trust me, I'll keep it. And, what's more, I'll help you. So my old man if you want him to. You see, you're a runaway 'prentice, that's all. It ain't anything. There ain't no harm in it. You've been treated bad, and you made up your mind to cut. Bless you, child, I wouldn't tell on you. Tell me all about it now, that's a good boy." So I said it wouldn't be no use to try to play it any longer, and I would just make a clean breast and tell her everything. But she must go back on her promise. Then I told her my father and mother was dead, and the law had bound me out to a mean old farmer in the country 30 miles back from the river, and he treated me so bad I couldn't stand it no longer. He went away to be gone a couple of days, and so I took my chance and stole some of his daughter's old clothes and cleared out. And I had been 3 nights coming the 30 miles. I traveled nights, and hid daytimes and slept, and the bag of bread and meat I carried from home lasted me all the way, and I had plenty. I said I believed my Uncle Abner Moore would take care of me, and so that was why I struck out for this town of Goshen. Goshen, child? This ain't Goshen. This is St. Petersburg. Goshen's 10 miles further up the river. Who told you this was Goshen? Why, a man I met at daybreak this morning, just as I was going to turn into the woods for my regular sleep. He told me when the roads forked I must take the right hand, and 5 miles would fetch me to Goshen. He was drunk, I reckon. He told you just exactly wrong. Well, he did act like he was drunk, but it ain't no matter now. I got to be moving along. I'll fetch Goshen before daylight. Hold on a minute. I'll put you up a snack to eat. You might want it." So she put me up a snack, and says, "Say, when a cow's laying down, which end of her gets up first? Answer. Up prompt now, don't stop to study over it. Which end gets up first? The hind end, Mom. Well, then a horse. The forward end, Mom. Which side of a tree does the moss grow on? North side. If 15 cows is browsing on a hillside, how many of them eats with their heads pointed the same direction? The whole 15, Mom. Well, I reckon you have lived in the country. I thought maybe you was trying to hocus me again. What's your real name now?" "George Peters, Mum." "Well, try to remember it, George. Don't forget and tell me it's Alexander before you go, and then get out by saying it's George Alexander when I catch you. And don't go about women in that old calico. You do a girl tolerable poor, but you might fool men, maybe. Bless you, child, when you set out to thread a needle, don't hold the thread still and fetch the needle up to it. Hold the needle still and poke the thread at it. That's the way a woman most always does, but man always does t'other way. And when you throw at a rat or anything, hitch yourself up a tiptoe and fetch your hand up over your head as awkward as you can, and miss your rat about 6 or 7 foot. Throw, stiff-armed from the shoulder, like there was a pivot there for it to turn on, like a girl, not from the wrist and elbow, with your arm out to one side, like a boy. And, mind you, when a girl tries to catch anything in her lap, she throws her knees apart. She don't clap them together, the way you did when you catched the lump of lead. Why, I spotted you for a boy when you was threading the needle, and I contrived the other things just to make certain. Now trot along to your uncle, Sarah Mary Williams George Alexander Peters, and if you get into trouble, you send word to Mrs. Judith Loftus, which is me, and I'll do what I can to get you out of it. Keep the river road all the way, and next time you tramp, take shoes and socks with you. The river road's a rocky one, and your feet'll be in a condition when you get to Goshen, I reckon. I went up the bank about 50 yards, and then I doubled on my tracks and slipped back to where my canoe was, a good piece below the house. I jumped in and was off in a hurry. I went upstream far enough to make the head of the island and then started across. I took off the sunbonnet, for I didn't want no blinders on then. When I was about the middle, I heard the clock begin to strike, so I stops and listens. The sound come faint over the water, but clear. 11. When I struck the head of the island, I never waited to blow, though I was most winded, but I shoved right into the timber where my old camp used to be, and started a good fire there on a high and dry spot. Then I jumped in the canoe and dug out for our place, 1.5 miles below, as hard as I could go. I landed and slopped through the timber, and up the ridge and into the cavern. There Jim laid, sound asleep on the ground. I roused him out and says, "Get up and hump yourself, Jim. There ain't a minute to lose. There, after us." Jim never asked no questions, he never said a word, but the way he worked for the next half an hour showed about how he was scared. By that time, everything we had in the world was on our raft, and she was ready to be shoved out from the willow cove where she was hid. We put out the campfire at the cavern the first thing, and didn't show a candle outside after that. I took the canoe out from the shore a little piece, and took a look, but if there was a boat around I couldn't see it, for stars and shadows ain't good to see by. Then we got out the raft, and slipped along down in the shade, past the foot of the island, dead still, never saying a word. Chapter 12. It must have been close on to 1 o'clock when we got below the island at last, and the raft did seem to go mighty slow. If a boat was to come along, we was going to take to the canoe and break for the Illinois shore, and it was well a boat didn't come, for we hadn't ever thought to put the gun in the canoe, or a fishing line, or anything to eat. We was in Ruther too much of a sweat to think of so many things. It warn't good judgment to put everything on the raft. If the men went to the island, I just expect they found the campfire I built, and watched it all night for Jim to come. Anyways, they stayed away from us, and if my building the fire never fooled them, it warn't no fault of mine. I played it as low down on them as I could. When the first streak of day began to show, we tied up to a towhead in a big bend on the Illinois side, and hacked off cottonwood branches with the hatchet, and covered up the raft with them, so she looked like there had been a cave-in in the bank there. A towhead is a sandbar that has cottonwoods on it as thick as harrow teeth. We had mountains on the Missouri shore and heavy timber on the Illinois side, and the channel was down the Missouri shore at that place, so we weren't afraid of anybody running across us. We laid there all day and watched the rafts and steamboats spin down the Missouri shore, and upbound steamboats fight the big river in the middle. I told Jim all about the time I had jabbering with that woman, and Jim said she was a smart one, and if she was to start after us herself, she wouldn't set down and watch a campfire. No, sir, she'd fetch a dog. Well then, I said, why couldn't she tell her husband to fetch a dog? Jim said he bet she did think of it by the time the men was ready to start, and he believed they must have gone uptown to get a dog, and so they lost all that time, or else we wouldn't be here on a towhead 16 or 17 mile below the village. No, indeedy, we would be in that same old town again. So I said I didn't care what was the reason they didn't get us as long as they didn't. When it was beginning to come on dark, we poked our heads out of the cottonwood thicket and looked up and down and across. Nothing in sight. So Jim took up some of the top planks of the raft and built a snug wigwam to get under in blazing weather and rainy, and to keep the things dry. Jim made a floor for the wigwam and raised it a foot or more above the level of the raft, so now the blankets and all the traps was out of reach of steamboat waves. Right in the middle of the wigwam, we made a layer of dirt about 5 or 6 inches deep with a frame around it for to hold it to its place. This was to build a fire on in sloppy weather or chilly. The wigwam would keep it from being seen. We made an extra steering or two because one of the others might get broke on a snag or something. We fixed up a short forked stick to hang the old lantern on because we must always light the lantern whenever we see a steamboat coming downstream to keep from getting run over. But we wouldn't have to light it for upstream boats unless we see we was in what they call a crossing, for the river was pretty high yet. Very low banks being still a little underwater, so upbound boats didn't always run the channel, but hunted easy water. This second night we run between 7 and 8 hours with a current that was making over 4 miles an hour. We catched fish and talked, and we took a swim now and then to keep off sleepiness. It was kind of solemn, drifting down the big, still river, laying on our backs looking up at the stars, and we didn't ever feel like talking loud, and it weren't often that we laughed, only a little kind of a low chuckle. We had mighty good weather as a general thing, and nothing ever happened to us at all that night, nor the next, nor the next. Every night we passed towns, some of them away up on black hillsides. Nothing but just a shiny bed of lights. Not a house could you see. The fifth night we passed St. Louis, and it was like the whole world lit up. In St. Petersburg they used to say there was 20 or 30,000 people in St. Louis, but I never believed it till I see that wonderful spread of lights at 2 o'clock that still night. There weren't a sound there. Everybody was asleep. Every night now I used to slip ashore towards 10 o'clock at some little village, and buy 10 or 15 cents worth of meal or bacon or other stuff to eat. And sometimes I lifted a chicken that weren't roosting comfortable and took him along. Pap always said, take a chicken when you get a chance, because if you don't want him yourself, you can easy find somebody that does, and a good deed ain't ever forgot. I never see Pap when he didn't want the chicken himself, but that is what he used to say anyway. Mornings before daylight, I slipped into cornfields and borrowed a watermelon, or a mushmelon, or a pumpkin, or some new corn, or things of that kind. Pap always said it warn't no harm to borrow things if you was meaning to pay them back some time, but the widow said it warn't anything but a soft name for stealing, and no decent body would do it. Jim said he reckoned the widow was partly right, and Pap was partly right. So the best way would be for us to pick out 2 or 3 things from the list and say we wouldn't borrow them any more. Then he reckoned it wouldn't be no harm to borrow the others. So we talked it over all one night, drifting along down the river, trying to make up our minds whether to drop the watermelons or the cantaloupes or the mushmelons or what. But towards daylight we got it all settled satisfactory and concluded to drop crab apples and persimmons. We weren't feeling just right before that, but it was all comfortable now. I was glad the way it come out, too, because crab apples ain't ever good, and the persimmons wouldn't be ripe for 2 or 3 months yet. We shot a waterfowl now and then that got up too early in the morning, or didn't go to bed early enough in the evening. Take it all round, we lived pretty high. The 5th night below St. Louis, we had a big storm after midnight, with a power of thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in a solid sheet. We stayed in the wigwam and let the raft take care of itself. When the lightning glared out, we could see a big straight river ahead, and high, rocky bluffs on both sides. By and by, says I, "Hello, Jim. Looky yonder." It was a steamboat that had killed herself on a rock. We was drifting straight down for her. The lightning showed her very distinct. She was leaning over, with part of her upper deck above water, and you could see every little chimbley guy clean and clear, and a chair by the big bell, with an old slouch hat hanging on the back of it when the flashes come. Well, it being away in the night and stormy, and all so mysterious-like, I felt just the way any other boy would have felt when I see that wreck laying there so mournful and lonesome in the middle of the river. I wanted to get aboard of her and slink around a little and see what there was there. So I says, "Lee's land on her, Jim." But Jim was dead against it at first. He says, I don't want to go foolin' long or no rack. We's doin' blame well. And we better let blame well alone, as the good book says. Like as not. Dey's a watchman on dat rack. Watchman your grandmother. I says, there ain't nothing to watch but the Texas and the pilot house. And do you reckon anybody's going to risk his life for a Texas and a pilot house such a night as this, when it's likely to break up and wash off down the river any minute? Jim couldn't say nothing to that, so he didn't try. And besides, I says, we might borrow something worth having out of the captain's stateroom. Seegers, I bet you, and cost 5 cents apiece, solid cash. Steamboat captains is always rich and get $60 a month, and they don't care a cent what a thing costs, you know, long as they want it. Stick a candle in your pocket. I can't rest, Jim, till we give her a rummaging. Do you reckon Tom Sawyer would ever go by this thing? Not for pie, he wouldn't. He'd call it an adventure. That's what he'd call it. And he'd land on that wreck if it was his last act. And wouldn't he throw style into it? Wouldn't he spread himself, nor nothing? Why, you'd think it was Christopher Columbus discovering Kingdom Come. I wish Tom Sawyer was here. Jim, he grumbled a little, but give in. He said we mustn't talk any more. Then we could help, and then talk mighty low. The lightning showed us the wreck again just in time, and we fetched the starboard derrick and made fast there. The deck was high out here. We went sneaking down the slope of it to larboard, in the dark, towards the Texas, feeling our way slow with our feet, and spreading our hands out to fend off the guys, for it was so dark we couldn't see no sign of them. Pretty soon we struck the forward end of the skylight, and clumb onto it, and the next step fetched us in front of the captain's door, which was open, and by Jiminy, away. Down through the Texas Hall, we see a light. And all in the same second, we seemed to hear low voices in yonder. Jim whispered and said he was feeling powerful sick and told me to come along. I says, all right, and was going to start for the raft, but just then I heard a voice wail out and say, oh, please don't, boys. I swear I won't ever tell. Another voice said, pretty loud, it's a lie, Jim Turner. You've acted this way before. You always want more in your share of the truck, and you've always got it, too, because you've swore if you didn't you'd tell. But this time you've said it. Just one time too many. You're the meanest, treacherousest hound in this country. By this time Jim was gone for the raft. I was just biling with curiosity, and I says to myself, Tom Sawyer wouldn't back out now, and so I won't either. I'm going to see what's going on here. So I dropped on my hands and knees in the little passage and crept aft in the dark till there warn't but one stateroom betwixt me and the cross hull of the Texas. Then in there I see a man stretched on the floor and tied hand and foot, and 2 men standing over him, and one of them had a dim lantern in his hand, and the other one had a pistol. This one kept pointing the pistol at the man's head on the floor, and saying, I'd like to, and I or too, a mean skunk. The man on the floor would shrivel up and say, oh, please don't, Bill. I hain't ever going to tell. And every time he said that, the man with the lantern would laugh and say, deed you ain't. You never said no truer thing, in that, you bet. You. And once he said, hear him beg. And yet if we hadn't got the best of him and tied him, he'd have killed us both. And what for? Just for nothin'. Just because we stood on our rights. That's what for. But I lay you ain't goin' to threaten nobody any more, Jim Turner. Put up that pistol, Bill. Bill says, I don't want a Jake Packard. I'm for killin' him. And didn't he kill old Hatfield just the same way, and don't he deserve it? But I don't want him killed, and I've got my reasons for it. Bless yo' heart for them words, Jake Packard. I'll never forget you. Long's I live, says the man on the floor, sort of blubbering. Packard didn't take no notice of that, but hung up his lantern on a nail and started towards where I was there in the dark, and motioned Bill to come. I crawfished as fast as I could about 2 yards, but the boat slanted so that I couldn't make very good time. So to keep from getting run over, and catched I crawled into a stateroom on the upper side. The man came a-pawing along in the dark, and when Packard got to my stateroom, he says, "Here, come in here." And in he come, and Bill after him. But before they got in, I was up in the upper berth, cornered, and sorry I come. Then they stood there, with their hands on the ledge of the berth, and talked. I couldn't see them, but I could tell where they was by the whiskey they'd been having. I was glad I didn't drink whiskey, but it wouldn't made much difference. Anyway, because most of the time they couldn't have treed me because I didn't breathe. I was too scared. And, besides, a body couldn't breathe and hear such talk. They talked low and earnest. Bill wanted to kill Turner. He said he'll tell, and he will, if we was to give both our shares to him now. It wouldn't make no difference after the row and the way we've served him. Sure's you're born, he'll turn state's evidence. Now, you hear me. I'm for putting him out of his troubles. So am I, says Packard, very quiet. Blame it. I'd sorter begun to think you wasn't. Well, then, that's all. Right. Please go and do it. Hold on a minute. I hain't had my say yet. You listen to me. Shooting's good, but there's quieter ways if the thing's got to be done. But what I say is this. It ain't good sense to go court in around after a halter if you can get at what you're up to in some way. That's just as good, and at the same time don't bring you into no risks. Ain't that so? You bet it is. But how you going to manage it this time? Well, my idea is this. We'll rustle around and gather up whatever pickings we've overlooked in the staterooms and shove for shore and hide the truck. Then we'll wait. Now I say it ain't going to be more in 2 hours before this rack breaks up and washes off down the river. See, he'll be drowned dead and won't have nobody to blame for it but his own self. I reckon that's a considerable sight better in killin' of him. I'm unfavorable to killin' a man as long as you can get around. It ain't good sense, it ain't good morals. Ain't I right? Yes, I reckon you are. But I suppose she don't break up and wash off. Well, we can wait the 2 hours anyway and see, can't we? All right, then, come along. So they started, and I lit out, all in a cold sweat, and scrambled forward. It was dark as pitch there, but I said, in a kind of a coarse whisper, "Jim," and he answered up, right at my elbow, with a sort of a moan, and I says, "Quick, Jim, it ain't no time for fooling around and moaning. There's a gang of murderers in yonder, and if we don't hunt up their boat and set her drifting down the river so these fellows can't get away from the wreck, there's one of 'em going to be in a bad fix. But if we find their boat, we can put all of 'em in a bad fix, for the sheriff LL get him. Quick, hurry. I'll hunt the larboard side. You hunt the starboard. You start at the raft and, oh my lordy, raft. Day I no raft, no mo. She done broke loose and gone I. And here we is. Chapter 13. Well, I catched my breath and most fainted. Shut up on a wreck with such a gang as that. But it warn't no time to be sentimenting. We'd got to find that boat now. Had to have it for ourselves. So we went, quaking and shaking down the starboard side, and slow work it was. Too. Seemed a week before we got to the stern. No sign of a boat. Jim said he didn't believe he could go any further. So scared he hadn't. Hardly any strength left, he said. But I said, come on, if we get left. On this wreck we are in a fix, sure. So on we prowled again. We struck for the stern of the Texas and found it, and then scrabbled along forwards on the skylight, hanging on from shutter to shutter, for the edge of the skylight was in the water. When we got pretty close to the cross-hull door, there was the skiff, sure enough. I could just barely see her. I felt ever so thankful. In another second I would have been aboard of her, but just then the door opened. One of the men stuck his head out only about a couple of foot from me, and I thought I was gone. But he jerked it in again, and says, "Heave that blame lantern out o' sight, Bill." He flung a bag of something into the boat, and then got in himself, and sat down. It was Packard. Then Billy come out and got in. Packard says, in a low voice, "All ready, shove off." I couldn't hardly hang on to the shutters. I was so weak. But Bill says, hold on, do you go through him? No. Didn't you? No. So he's got his share of the cash yet. Well, then, come along. No use to take truck and leave money. Say, won't he suspicion what we're up to? Maybe he won't, but we got to have it anyway. Come along. So they got out and went in. The door slammed to because it was on the careened side, and in a half second I was in the boat, and Jim come tumbling after me. I out with my knife and cut the rope, and away we went. We didn't touch an oar, and we didn't speak nor whisper, nor hardly even breathe. We went gliding swift along, dead silent, past the tip of the paddle box, and past the stern. Then in a second or two more we was 100 yards below the wreck, and the darkness soaked her up, every last sign of her, and we was safe, and knowed it. When we was 300 or 400 yards downstream, we see the lantern show like a little spark at the Texas door for a second, and we knowed by that the rascals had missed their boat and was beginning to understand that they was in just as much trouble now as Jim Turner was. Then Jim manned the oars, and we took out after our raft. Now was the first time that I begun to worry about the man. I reckon I hadn't had time to before. I begun to think how dreadful it was, even for murderers, to be in such a fix. I says to myself, there ain't no telling but I might come to be a murderer myself yet, and then how would I like it? So says I to Jim, the first light we see will land 100 yards below it or above it, in a place where it's a good hiding place for you and the skiff. And then I'll go and fix up some kind of a yarn and get somebody to go for that gang and get them out of their scrape so they can be hung when their time comes. But that idea was a failure, for pretty soon it begun to storm again, and this time worse than ever. The rain poured down, and never a light showed. Everybody in bed, I reckon. We boomed along down the river, watching for lights and watching for our raft. After a long time the rain let up, but the clouds stayed, and the lightning kept whimpering. And by a flash showed us a black thing ahead, floating, and we made for it. It was the raft, and mighty glad was we to get aboard of it again. We seen a light now away down to the right, on shore. So I said I would go for it. The skiff was half full of plunder which that gang had stole. There on the wreck. We hustled it onto the raft in a pile, and I told Jim to float along down and show a light when he judged he had gone about 2 miles, and keep it burning till I come. Then I manned my oars and shoved for the light. As I got down towards it, 3 or 4 more showed up on a hillside. It was a village. I closed in above the shore light and laid on my oars and floated. As I went by, I see it was a lantern hanging on the jackstaff of a double-hull ferry boat. I skimmed around for the watchman, wondering whereabouts he slept, and by I found him roosting on the bitts, forward, with his head down between his knees. I gave his shoulder 2 or 3 little shoves, and begun to cry. He stirred up, in a kind of a startlish way, but when he see it was only me, he took a good gap and stretch, and then he says, "Hello, what's up? Don't cry, bub. What's the trouble?" I says, "Pap, and ma'am, and sis, and..." Then I broke down. He says, "Oh, dang it now, don't take on so. We all has to have our troubles. And this and LL come out all right. What's the matter with them? There. Are you the watchman of the boat?" "Yes," he says, kind of pretty well satisfied like. "I'm the captain, and the owner, and the mate, and the pilot, and watchman, and head deckhand, and sometimes I'm the freight and passengers. I ain't as rich as old Jim Hornback, and I can't be so blame generous and good to Tom, Dick, and Harry is what he is, and slam around money the way he does. But I've told him a many a time I wouldn't trade places with him, for, says I, a sailor's life's the life for me, and I'm derned if I'd live 2 mile out o' town, where there ain't nothing ever going on, not for all his spondulics, and as much more on top of it." Says I broke in and says, "They're in an awful peck of trouble, and..." "Who is?" Why, Pap and Mam and Sis and Miss Hooker, and if you take your ferry boat and go up there. Up where? Where are they? On the wreck. What wreck? Why, there ain't but one. What? You don't mean the Walter Scott? Yes. Good land. What are they doing there, for gracious sakes? Well, they didn't go there a purpose. I bet they didn't. Why? Great goodness, there ain't no chance for 'em. If they don't get off mighty quick. Why, how in the nation did they ever get into such a scrape? Easy enough. Miss Hooker was visiting up there to the town. Yes, Booth's Landing, go on. She was visiting there at Booth's Landing, and just in the edge of the evening she started over with her nigger woman in the horse ferry to stay all night at her friend's house, Miss what you may call her I disremember her name, and they lost their steering oar and swung around and went floating down stern first about 2 mile and saddlebags on the wreck, and the ferryman and the nigger woman and the horses was all lost. But Miss Hooker she made a grab and got aboard the wreck. Well, about an hour after dark we come along down in our trading scow, and it was so dark we didn't notice the wreck till we was right on it. And so we saddlebagsed, but all of us was saved but Bill Whipple, and oh, he was the best creeter. I most wished it had been me, I do. My George, it's the beatenest thing I ever struck. And then what did you all do? Well, we hollered and took on, but it's so wide there we couldn't make nobody here. So Pap said somebody got to get ashore and get help. Somehow, I was the only one that could swim, so I made a dash for it. And Miss Hooker she said if I didn't strike help sooner, come here and hunt up her uncle, and he'd fix the thing. I made the land about a mile below, and been fooling along ever since, trying to get people to do something. But they said, what? In such a night and such a current? There ain't no sense in it. Go for the steam ferry. Now if you'll go. And, by Jackson, I'd like to, and, blame it, I don't know but I will, but, who in the dingnation's going to pay for it? Do you reckon you're Pap? Why, that's all right. Miss Hooker she told me, particular that, her Uncle Hornback. Great guns. Is he her uncle? Looky here, you break for that light. Over yonder way, and turn out west when you get there, and about a quarter of a mile out you'll come to the tavern. Tell him to dart you out to Jim Hornback's, and he'll foot the bill. And don't you fool around any, because he'll want to know the news. Tell him I'll have his niece all safe before he can get to town. Hump yourself, now I'm going up around the corner here to roust out my engineer. I struck for the light, but as soon as he turned the corner I went back and got into my skiff and bailed her out, and then pulled up shore in the easy water about 600 yards, and tucked myself in amongst some wood boats, for I couldn't rest easy till I could see the ferry boat start. But take it all around, I was feeling ruther comfortable on accounts of taking all this trouble for that gang, for not many would done it. I wished the widow knowed about it. I judged she would be proud of me for helping these rapscallions, because rapscallions and deadbeats is the kind the widow and good people takes the most interest in. Well, before long, here comes the wreck, dim and dusky, sliding along. Down. A kind of cold shiver went through me, and then I struck out for her. She was very deep, and I see in a minute there warn't much chance for anybody being alive in her. I pulled all around her and hollered a little, but there wasn't any answer. All dead still. I felt a little bit heavy-hearted about the gang, but not much, for I reckoned if they could stand it, I could. Then here comes the ferry boat, so I shoved for the middle of the river, on a long downstream slant, and when I judged I was out of eye reach, I laid on my oars, and looked back and see her go and smell around the wreck for Miss Hooker's remainders, because the captain would know her. Uncle Hornback would want them, and then pretty soon the ferry boat give it up and went for the shore, and I laid into my work and went booming down the river. It did seem a powerful long time before Jim's light showed up, and when it did show, it looked like it was 1,000 miles off. By the time I got there, the sky was beginning to get a little gray in the east, so we struck for an island, and hid the raft, and sunk the skiff, and turned in, and slept like dead people. Chapter 14. By and by, when we got up, we turned over the truck the gang had stole off of the wreck, and found boots, and blankets, and clothes, and all sorts of other things, and a lot of books, and a spyglass, and 3 boxes of Seegers. We hadn't ever been this rich before in neither of our lives. The Seegers was prime. We laid off all the afternoon in the woods talking, and me reading the books, and having a general good time. I told Jim all about what happened inside the wreck, and at the ferry boat, and I said these kinds of things was adventures, but he said he didn't want no more adventures. He said that when I went in the Texas, and he crawled back to get on the raft, and found her gone, he nearly died, because he judged it was all up with him, anyway it could be fixed, for if he didn't get saved he would get drowned dead, and if he did get saved, whoever saved him would send him back home, so as to get the reward, and then Miss Watson would sell him south, sure. Well, he was right. He was most always right. He had an uncommon level head, for a nigger. I read considerable to Jim about kings and dukes and earls and such, and how gaudy they dressed, and how much style they put on, and called each other your majesty, and your grace, and your lordship, and so on, instead of Mr. And Jim's eyes bugged out, and he was interested. He says, I didn't know day was so many I hain't hearn about none Scazely, but old King Solomon, onless you counts dem kings dats and a packer k-yards. How much do a king get? I says, why, they get $1,000 a month if they want it. They can have just as much as they want. Everything belongs to them. I'm dat gay. And what they got to do, Huck? They don't do nothing. Why, how you talk? They just sit around. No, is dat so? Of course it is. They just sit around. Except, maybe, when there's a war. Then they go to the war. But other times they just lazy around. Or go hawking, just hawking and SPSH. Do you hear a noise? We skipped out and looked, but it warn't nothing but the flutter of a steamboat's wheel away down, coming around the point, so we come back. Yes, says I. And other times, when things is dull, they fuss with the Parliament, and if everybody don't go, just so he whacks their heads off. But mostly they hang round the harem. Ruined a witch. Harem. What's the harem? The place where he keeps his wives. Don't you know about the harem? Solomon had one. He had about 1,000,000 wives. Why, yes, that's so. I'd done forgot it. A harem's a Boden house, I reckon. Most likely day has rackety times in de nussery. And I reckon da wives quarrels considable, and dat creased a racket. Yet they say, Solomon de wisest man dat ever live. I don't take no stock in dat. Because why, would a wise man want to live in de mids or sich blim blammin' all the time? No, deed he wouldn't. A wise man you'd take in. Bill a biler factory, and den he could shet down de biler factory when he want a res. Well, but he was the wisest man, anyway, because the widow she told me so her own self. I don't keer what de widders say, he warn't no wise man nuther. He had some de dad fetched ways I ever see. Does you know about dat? Chili dat he use gwine to choppin' too. Yes, the widow told me all about it. Well den, warn dat de beaten's notion into whirl. You just take and look at it a minute. Da's de stump, dat's one de women. He is you, dat's de yuther one. I Solomon, and dish your dollar. Bill's de chili. Bofen you claims it. What does I do? Does I shin around mongs de neighbors and find out which on you de bill do belong to, and hon it over to de right one, all safe and sown, de way dat anybody dat had any gumption would? No, I take and whack de bill in, too, and give half on it to you, and de yuther half to de yuther woman. That's the way Solomon was gwine to do wid de chili. Now I want a AST. You. What's to use dat half a bill? Can't buy nothin' wid it. And what? Uses a half a chili? I wouldn't give a dern for 1,000,000 on But hang it, Jim, you've clean missed the point. Blame it, you've. Missed it 1,000 mile. Who? Me? Go long. Don't talk to me about yo pints. I reckon I knows sense when I sees it. And dey I no sense in sich doin's as dat. Dispute warn't 'bout a half a chili, dispute was 'bout a whole chili, and demand that think he can settle a spute 'bout a whole chili. Would a half a chili don't know enough to come in out in de rain? Don't talk to me 'bout Solomon. Huck, I knows him by de back. But I tell you don't get the point. Blame de point. I reckon I knows what I knows. And mind you de real pint is down furder, it's down deeper. It lays in de way Solomon was raised. You take a man dat's got only 1 or 2 chillin', is dat man gwine to be wasteful o' chillin'? No, he ain't. He can't afford it. He know how to value 'em. But you take a man dat's got 'bout 5 million chillin' runnin' ruin de house, and it's defunt. He is soon chop a chili in 2 as a cat. Days plenty mo. A chili or 2, mo or less. Wart no consequence to Solomon, dad fatch him. I never see such a nigger. If he got a notion in his head once there, warn't no getting it out again. He was the most down on Solomon of any nigger I ever see. So I went to talking about other kings, and let Solomon slide. I told about Louis XVI that got his head cut off in France long time ago, and about his little boy the dolphin, that would have been a king, but they took and shut him up in jail, and some say he died there. Poor little chap. But some says he got out and got away, and come to America. That's good. But he'll be pooty lonesome. Dey I no kings here is. Dey Huck. No. Den he can't get no situation. What he gwine to do? Well, I don't know. Some of them gets on the police, and some of them learns people how to talk French. Why? Huck, don't the French people talk the same way we does? No, Jim. You couldn't understand a word they said. Not a single word. Well, now I be ding busted. How do dat come? I don't know, but it's so. I got some of their jabber out of a book. S'pose a man was to come to you and say Parlez-vous Franzy, what would you think? I wouldn't think nothin'. I'd take and bust him over de head. That is, if he weren't white. I wouldn't low no nigger to call me dat. Shucks, it ain't calling you anything. It's only saying, do you know how to talk French? Well, den, why couldn't he say it? Why, he is a saying it. That's a Frenchman's way of saying it. Well, it's a blame ridiculous way, and I don't want to hear no mo about it. Dey I no sense in it. Looky here, Jim, does a cat talk like we do? No, a cat don't. Well, does a cow? No, a cow don't nuther. Does a cat talk like a cow, or a cow talk like a cat? No, dey don't. It's natural and right for 'em to talk different from each other. Ain't it? Course. And ain't it natural and right for a cat and a cow to talk different from us? Why, most surely it is. Well, then, why ain't it natural and right for a Frenchman to talk different from us? You answer me that. Is a cat a man, Huck? No. Well, den, dey ain't no sense in a cat talking like a man. Is a cow a man? Or is a cow a cat? No, she ain't either of them. Well, den, she ain't got no business to talk like either one or the either of 'em. Is a Frenchman a man? Yes. Well, den, dad blame it. Why don't he talk like a man? You answer. Me dat. I see it warn't no use wasting words. You can't learn a nigger to argue. So I quit. Chapter 15. We judged that 3 nights more would fetch us to Cairo, at the bottom of Illinois, where the Ohio River comes in, and that was what we was. After, we would sell the raft and get on a steamboat and go way up the Ohio amongst the free states, and then be out of trouble. Well, the second night a fog begun to come on, and we made for a towhead to tie to, for it wouldn't do to try to run in a fog. But when I paddled ahead in the canoe, with the line to make fast, there weren't anything but little saplings to tie to. I passed the line around one of them right on the edge of the cut bank, but there was a stiff current, and the raft come booming down so lively she tore it out by the roots. And away she went. I see the fog closing down, and it made me so sick and scared I couldn't budge for most a half a minute it seemed to me. and then there weren't no raft in sight. You couldn't see 20 yards. I jumped into the canoe and run back to the stern and grabbed the paddle and set her back a stroke. But she didn't come. I was in such a hurry I hadn't untied her. I got up and tried to untie her, but I was so excited my hands shook so I couldn't hardly do anything with them. As soon as I got started, I took out after the raft, hot and heavy, right down the towhead. That was all right as far as it went, but the towhead weren't 60 yards long, and the minute I flew by the foot of it, I shot out into the solid white fog and hadn't no more idea which way I was going than a dead man. Thinks I, it won't do to paddle. First I know I'll run into the bank or a towhead or something. I got to sit still and float, and yet it's mighty fidgety business to have to hold your hands still at such a time. I hooped and listened. Away down there somewheres I hears a small whoop, and up comes my spirits. I went tearing after it, listening sharp to hear it again. The next time it come, I see I warn't heading for it, but heading away to the right of it. And the next time, I was heading away to the left of it, and not gaining on it much either, for I was flying around, this way and that and t'other, but it was going straight ahead all the time. I did wish the fool would think to beat a tin pan, and beat it all the time, but he never did, and it was the still places between the whoops that was making the trouble for me. Well, I fought along, and directly I hears the whoop behind me. I was tangled good now. That was somebody else's whoop, or else I was turned around. I throwed the paddle down. I heard the whoop again. It was behind me. Yet, but in a different place. It kept coming and kept changing its place, and I kept answering, till by and by it was in front of me again, and I knowed the current had swung the canoe's head downstream. And I was all right if that was Jim and not some other raftsman hollering. I couldn't tell nothing about voices in a fog, for nothing don't look natural nor sound natural in a fog. The whooping went on, and in about a minute I come a-booming down on a cut bank with smoky ghosts of big trees on it, and the current throwed me off to the left and shot by, amongst a lot of snags that fairly roared. The current was tearing by them so swift. In another second or two it was solid white and still again. I sat perfectly still then, listening to my heart thump, and I reckon I didn't draw a breath while it thumped 100. I just give up then. I knowed what the matter was. That cut bank was an island, and Jim had gone down t'other side of it. It warn't no towhead that you could float by in 10 minutes. It had the big timber of a regular island. It might be 5 or 6 miles long and more than half a mile wide. I kept quiet, with my ears cocked, about 15 minutes, I reckon. I was floating along, of course, 4 or 5 miles an hour, but you don't ever think of that. No, you feel like you are laying dead still on the water, and if a little glimpse of a snag slips by you don't think to yourself how fast you're going, but you catch your breath and think, my, how that snag's tearing along. If you think it ain't dismal and lonesome out in a fog that way by yourself in the night, you try it once, you'll see. Next, for about a half an hour, I whoops now and then. At last I hears the answer a long ways off, and tries to follow it, but I couldn't do it, and directly I judged I'd got into a nest of towheads, for I had little dim glimpses of them on both sides of me, sometimes just a narrow channel between, and some that I couldn't see I knowed was there, because I'd hear the wash of the current against the old dead brush and trash that hung over the banks. Well, I warn't long loosing the whoops down amongst the towheads, and I only tried to chase them a little while, anyway, because it was worse than chasing a jack-o'-lantern. You never know to sound dodge around so, and swap places so quick and so much. I had to claw away from the bank pretty lively 4 or 5 times, to keep from knocking me islands out of the river, and so I judged the raft must be butting into the bank every now and then, or else it would get further ahead and clear out of hearing. It was floating a little faster than what I was. Well, I seemed to be in the open river again by and by, but I couldn't hear no sign of a whoop nowheres. I reckon Jim had fetched up on a snag, Maybe, and it was all up with him. I was good and tired, so I laid down in the canoe and said I wouldn't bother no more. I didn't want to go to sleep, of course, but I was so sleepy I couldn't help it. So I thought I would take just one little cat nap. But I reckon it was more than a cat nap, for when I waked up the stars was shining bright, the fog was all gone, and I was spinning down a big bend stern first. First I didn't know where I was. I thought I was dreaming, and when things began to come back to me, they seemed to come up dim out of last week. It was a monstrous big river here, with the tallest and the thickest kind of timber on both banks, just a solid wall, as well as I could see by the stars. I looked away downstream and seen a black speck on the water. I took after it, but when I got to it, it weren't nothing but a couple of saw logs made fast together. Then I see another speck, and chased that, then another, and this time I was right. It was the raft. When I got to it, Jim was sitting there with his head down between his knees, asleep, with his right arm hanging over the steering oar. The other oar was smashed off, and the raft was littered up with leaves and branches and dirt, so she'd had a rough time. I made fast and laid down under Jim's nose on the raft and began to gap and stretch my fists out against Jim and says, "Hello, Jim, have I been asleep? Why didn't you stir me up? Goodness gracious, is that you, Huck? And you ain't dead, you ain't drowned, you's back again? It's too good for true, honey, it's too good for true. Let me look at you chilly, let me feel o' you. No, you ain't dead. You's back again, live in sown, JIS the same ol' Huck, the same ol' Huck, thanks to goodness. What's the matter with you, Jim? You been a-drinking? Drinking? Has I been a-drinking? Has I had a chance to be a-drinking? Well, then, what makes you talk so wild? How does I talk wild? How? Why, hain't you been talking about my coming back and all that stuff, as if I'd been gone away? Huck Finn, you look me into eye, hain't you been gone away? Gone away? Why, what in the nation do you mean? I hain't been gone anywheres. Where would I go to? Well, looky here, boss, day's something wrong, day is. Is I me, or who? Is I? Is I here, or was I? Now that's what I wants to know. Well, I think you're here, plain enough, but I think you're a tangle-headed old fool, Jim. I is I? Well, you answer me dis. Didn't you tote out de line in de canoe fair to make faz to de towhead? No, I didn't. What towhead? I hain't see no towhead. You hain't seen no towhead? Looky here, didn't de line pull loose en de raft go a-hummin down de river and leave you in de canoe behind in de fog? What fog? Why, de fog. De fog dat's been around all night. And didn't you whoop, and didn't I whoop, till we got mixed up in de islands in one on us got los and t'other one was geez as good as los. Case he didn't know what he was. And didn't I bust up eggin a lot er dem islands in half a tobal time and mos get drowned, Ed? Now ain't dat so, boss, ain't it? So, you answer me dat. Well, this is too many for me, Jim. I hain't seen no fog, nor no islands, nor no troubles, nor nothing. I've been setting here talking with you all night till you went to sleep about 10 minutes ago, and I reckon I done the same. You couldn't have got drunk in that time, so of course you've been dreaming. Dad, fetch it. How is I gwine to dream all dat in 10 minutes? Well, hang it all, you did dream it, because there didn't any of it happen. But, Huck, it's all geez as plain to me as. It don't make no difference how plain it is. There ain't nothing in it. I know, because I've been here all the time. Jim didn't say nothing for about 5 minutes, but sat there studying over it. Then he says, well, den, I reckon I did dream it, Huck, but dog my cats yef it ain't the powerfulest dream I ever see. And I hain't ever had no dream BFO. That's tired me like dis one. Oh, well, that's all right, because a dream does tire a body like everything sometimes. But this one was a staving dream. Tell me all about it, Jim. So Jim went to work and told me the whole thing right through, just as it happened. only he painted it up considerable. Then he said he must start in and interpret it, because it was sent for a warning. He said, the first towhead stood for a man that would try to do us some good, but the current was another man that would get us away from him. The whoops was warnings that would come to us every now and then, and if we didn't try hard to make out to understand them, they'd just take us into bad luck, instead of keeping us out of it. The lot of towheads was troubles we was going to get into with quarrelsome people and all kinds of mean folks, but if we minded our business and didn't talk back and aggravate them, we would pull through and get out of the fog and into the big clear river, which was the free states, and wouldn't have no more trouble. It had clouded up pretty dark just after I got onto the raft, but it was clearing up again now. Oh, well, that's all interpreted well enough as far as it goes, Jim, I says, but what does these things stand for? It was the leaves and rubbish on the raft and the smashed oar. You could see them first rate now. Jim looked at the trash, and then looked at me, and back at the trash. Again, he had got the dream fixed so strong in his head that he couldn't seem to shake it loose and get the facts back into its place again right away. But when he did get the thing straightened around, he looked at me steady without ever smiling, and says, what do days stand for? I see gwine to tell you. When I got all wore out, would work, and wid to Callan for you, and went to sleep, my heart was mos broke because you was los, and I didn't know what become her, me and the raft. And when I wake up and find you back again, all safe and sown, the tears come, and I could 'a got down on my knees and kiss yo foot. I so thankful. And all you was thinking 'bout was how you could make a fool UV old Jim would a lie. Dat truck da is trash, and trash is what people is dat puts dirt on to header day friends and makes them ashamed. Then he got up slow and walked to the wigwam and went in there without saying anything but that. But that was enough. It made me feel so mean. I could almost kissed his foot to get him to take it back. It was 15 minutes before I could work myself up to go and humble myself to a nigger, but I done it, and I warn't ever sorry for it. Afterwards, neither. I didn't do him no more mean tricks, and I wouldn't done that one if I'd a knowed it would make him feel that way. Chapter 16. We slept most all day, and started out at night, a little ways behind a monstrous long raft that was as long going by as a procession. She had 4 long sweeps at each end, so we judged she carried as many as 30 men, likely. She had 5 big wigwams aboard, wide apart, and an open campfire in the middle, and a tall flagpole at each end. There was a power of style about her. It amounted to something being a raftsman on such a craft as that. We went drifting down into a big bend, and the night clouded up and got hot. The river was very wide, and was walled with solid timber on both sides. You couldn't see a break in it hardly ever, or a light. We talked about Cairo, and wondered whether we would know it when we got to it. I said likely we wouldn't, because I had heard say there weren't but about a dozen houses there, and if they didn't happen to have them lit up, how was we going to know we was passing a town? Jim said if the 2 big rivers joined together there, that would show. But I said maybe we might think we was passing the foot of an island and coming into the same old river again. That disturbed Jim, and me too. So the question was what to do. I said, paddle ashore the first time a light showed, and tell them Pap was behind, coming along with a trading scow, and was a green hand at the business, and wanted to know how far it was to Cairo. Jim thought it was a good idea, so we took a smoke on it, and waited. There warn't nothing to do now but to look out sharp for the town, and not pass it without seeing it. He said he'd be mighty sure to see it, because he'd be a free man the minute he seen it, but if he missed it, he'd be in a slave country again and no more show for freedom. Every little while he jumps up and says, "Da she is," but it warn't. It was jack-o'-lanterns or lightning bugs, so he sat down again and went to watching, same as before. Jim said it made him all over trembly and feverish to be so close to freedom. Well, I can Tell you it made me all over trembly and feverish, too, to hear him, because I begun to get it through my head that he was most free. And who was to blame for it? Why me? I couldn't get that out of my conscience, no how nor no way. It got to troubling me so I couldn't rest. I couldn't stay still in one place. It had never come home to me before what this thing was that I was doing. But now it did, and it stayed with me and scorched me more and more. I tried to make out to myself that I warn't to blame because I didn't run Jim off from his rightful owner, but it warn't no use. Conscience up and says, every time. But you knowed he was running for his freedom, and you could paddled ashore and told somebody. That was so, I couldn't get around that no way. That was where it pinched. Conscience says to me, what had poor Miss Watson done to you that you could see her nigger go off right under your eyes and never say one single word? What did that poor old woman do to you that you could treat her so mean? Why, she tried to learn you your book. She tried to learn you your manners. She tried to be good to you every way she knowed how. That's what she done. I got to feeling so mean and so miserable I most wished I was dead. I fidgeted up and down the raft, abusing myself to myself, and Jim was fidgeting up and down past me. We neither of us could keep still. Every time he danced around and says, "Das Cairo," it went through me like a shot, and I thought if it was Cairo I reckon I would die of miserableness. Jim talked out loud all the time while I was talking to myself. He was saying how the first thing he would do when he got to a free state he would go to saving up money and never spend a single cent, and when he got enough he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm close to where Miss Watson lived, and then they would both work to buy the two children, and if their master wouldn't sell them, they'd get an abolitionist to go and steal them. It most froze me to hear such talk. He would never dared to talk such talk in his life before. Just see what a difference it made in him the minute he judged he was about free. It was according to the old saying, give a nigger an inch, and he'll take an ell. Thinks I, this is what comes of my not thinking. Here was this nigger, which I had as good as helped to run away, coming right out flat-footed and saying he would steal his children that belonged to a man I didn't even know, a man that hadn't ever done me no harm. I was sorry to hear Jim say that. It was such a lowering of him. My conscience got to stirring me up hotter than ever, until at last I says to it, let up on me. It ain't too late yet. I'll paddle ashore at the first light and tell. I felt easy and happy and light as a feather. Right off, all my troubles was gone. I went to looking out sharp for a light and sort of singing to myself. By and by one showed. Jim sings out, we safe, Huck, we safe. Jump up and crack yo heels. That's the good old Cairo at loss. IJIS knows it. I says, I'll take the canoe and go and see Jim. It mightn't be, you know. He jumped and got the canoe ready and put his old coat in the bottom for me to set on and give me the paddle. And as I shoved off, he says, Pooty, soon I'll be a shout and for joy, and I'll say, it's all on accounts o' Huck. I's a free man, and I couldn't ever been free yeffet. Hadn't been for Huck, Huck done it. Jim won't ever forget you, Huck. You's the best friend Jim's ever had, and you's the only friend old Jim's got now. I was paddling off, all in a sweat to tell on him, but when he says this, it seemed to kind of take the tuck all out of me. I went along, slow then, and I warn't right down certain whether I was glad I started, or whether I warn't. When I was 50 yards off, Jim says, "Da you goes, da old true Huck, da onny white gentleman dat ever kept his promise to old Jim." Well, I just felt sick, but I says, I got to do it. I can't get out of it. Right then along comes a skiff with 2 men in it with guns, and they stopped and I stopped. One of them says, "What's that yonder?" "A piece of a raft," I says. "Do you belong on it?" "Yes, sir." "Any men on it?" "Only one, sir." "Well, there's 5 niggers run off tonight up yonder, above the head of the bend. Is your man white or black?" I didn't answer up prompt. I tried to, but the words wouldn't come. I tried for a second or two to brace up and out with it, but I warn't man. Enough. Hadn't the spunk of a rabbit. I see I was weakening, so I just give up trying and up and says, "He's white. I reckon we'll go and see for ourselves." "I wish you would," says I, "because it's pap that's there, and maybe you'd help me tow the raft ashore where the light is. He's sick, and so is Ma'am and Marianne." "Oh, the devil. We're in a hurry, boy, but I suppose we've got to. Come, buckle to your paddle, and let's get along." I buckled to my paddle, and they laid to their oars. When we had made a stroke or two, I says, "Pap'll be mighty much obleeged to you, I can tell you." Everybody goes away when I want them to help me tow the raft ashore, and I can't do it by myself. Well, that's infernal mean. Odd, too. Say, boy, what's the matter with your father? It's well, it ain't anything much. They stopped pulling. It warn't but a mighty little ways to the raft. Now, one says, "Boy, that's a lie. What is the matter with your pap? Answer up, square now, and it'll be the better for you." "I will, sir, I will, honest, but don't leave us, please. It's the gentleman. If you'll only pull ahead and let me heave you the headline, you won't have to come near the raft. Please do. Set her back, John, set her back," says one. They backed water. "Keep away, boy, keep to Lord. Confound it, I just expect the wind has blowed it to us. Your pap's got the smallpox, and you know it precious well. Why didn't you come out and say so? Do you want to spread it all over?" "Well," says I, a blubbering, "I've told everybody before, and they just went away and left us. Poor devil, there's something in that. We are right down sorry for you, but well, hang it, we don't want the smallpox, you see. Look, here, I'll tell you what to do. Don't you try to land by yourself, or you'll smash everything to pieces. You float along down about 20 miles, and you'll come to a town on the left-hand side of the river. It will be long after sunup then, and when you ask for help you tell them your folks are all down with chills and fever. Don't be a fool again, and let people guess what is the matter. Now we're trying to do you a kindness, so you just put 20 miles between us. That's a good boy. It wouldn't do any good to land yonder where the light is. It's only a woodyard. Say, I reckon your father's poor, and I'm bound to say he's in pretty hard luck. Here, I'll put a $20 gold piece on this board, and you get it when it floats by. I feel mighty mean to leave you, but my kingdom, it won't do to fool with smallpox, don't you see? Hold on, Parker, says the other man. Here's a 20 to put on the board for me. Goodbye, boy. You do as Mr. Parker told you, and you'll be all right. That's so, my boy. Goodbye, goodbye. If you see any runaway niggers, you get help and nab them, and you can make some money by it. Goodbye, sir, says I. I won't let no runaway niggers get by me if I can help it. They went off, and I got aboard the raft, feeling bad and low, because I knowed very well I had done wrong, and I see it warn't no use for me to try to learn to do right. A body that don't get started right when he's little ain't got no show. When the pinch comes, there ain't nothing to back him up and keep him to his work, and so he gets beat. Then I thought a minute, and says to myself, hold on, s'pose you'd a done right and give Jim up, would you felt better than what you do now? No, says I, I'd feel bad. I'd feel just the same way I do now. Well then, says I, what's the use you learning to do right when it's troublesome? To do right and ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same? I was stuck. I couldn't answer that, so I reckoned I wouldn't bother no more about it. But after this, always do whichever come handiest at the time. I went into the wigwam. Jim warn't there. I looked all around. He warn't anywhere. I says, Jim, here I is, Huck. Is dey out o' sight yet? Don't talk loud. He was in the river under the stern oar, with just his nose out. I told him they were out of sight, so he come aboard. He says, I was a-listenin' to all de talk, and I slips into de river and was gwine to shove for show if dey come aboard. Den I was gwine to swim to de raft, agin when day was gone. But lawsy, how you did fool 'em, Huck. That was de smarts dodge. I tell you, Chilly, I spec it save ol' Jim. Old Jim ain't going to forget you for dat, honey. Then we talked about the money. It was a pretty good raise, $20 apiece. Jim said we could take deck passage on a steamboat now, and the money would last us as far as we wanted to go in the free states. He said 20 mile more warn't far for the raft to go, but he wished we was already there. Towards daybreak, we tied up, and Jim was mighty particular about hiding the raft good. Then he worked all day fixing things in bundles and getting all ready to quit rafting. That night about 10 we hove in sight of the lights of a town away down in a left-hand bend. I went off in the canoe to ask about it. Pretty soon I found a man out in the river with a skiff, setting a trot line. I ranged up and says, "Mister, is that town Cairo?" "Cairo? No. You must be a blame fool. What town is it, mister? If you want to know, go and find out. If you stay here both Aaron around me for about a half a minute longer, you'll get something you won't want." I paddled to the raft. Jim was awful disappointed, but I said never mind. Cairo would be the next place, I reckoned. We passed another town before daylight, and I was going out again, but it was high ground, so I didn't go. No high ground about Cairo, Jim said. I had forgot it. We laid up for the day on a towhead tolerable, close to the left-hand bank. I begun to suspicion something. So did Jim. I says, "Maybe we went by Cairo in the fog that night." He says, "Don't lease talk about it, Huck. But niggers can't have no luck. I allus suspect that rattlesnake skin warn't done wid its work. I wish I'd never seen that snake skin, Jim. I do wish I'd never laid eyes on it. It ain't yo' fault. Huck, you didn't know. Don't you blame yourself 'bout it." When it was daylight, here was the clear Ohio water inshore, sure enough, and outside was the old regular muddy. So it was all up with Cairo. We talked it all over. It wouldn't do to take to the shore. We couldn't take the raft up the stream, of course. There warn't no way but to wait for dark and start back in the canoe and take the chances. So we slept all day amongst the cottonwood thicket, so as to be fresh for the work. And when we went back to the raft about dark, the canoe was gone. We didn't say a word for a good while. There warn't anything to say. We both knowed well enough it was some more work of the rattlesnake skin. So what was the use to talk about it? It would only look like we was finding fault, and that would be bound to fetch more bad luck, and keep on fetching it, too, till we knowed enough to keep still. By and by we talked about what we better do, and found there warn't no way but just to go along down with the raft till we got a chance to buy a canoe to go back in. We weren't going to borrow it when there warn't anybody around, the way Pap would do, for that might set people after us. So we shoved out after dark on the raft. Anybody that don't believe yet that it's foolishness to handle a snakeskin, after all that snakeskin done for us, will believe it. Now if they read on and see what more it done for us. The place to buy canoes is off of rafts laying up at shore. But we didn't see no rafts laying up, so we went along during 3 hours and more. Well, the night got gray and ruther thick, which is the next meanest thing to fog. You can't tell the shape of the river, and you can't see no distance. It got to be very late and still, and then along comes a steamboat up the river. We lit the lantern and judged she would see it. Upstream boats didn't generally come close to us. They go out and follow the bars and hunt for easy water under the reefs. But nights like this they bull right up the channel against the whole river. We could hear her pounding along, but we didn't see her good till she was close. She aimed right for us. Often they do that and try to see how close they can come without touching. Sometimes the wheel bites off a sweep, and then the pilot sticks his head out and laughs and thinks he's mighty smart. Well, here she comes, and we said she was going to try and shave us, but she didn't seem to be shearing off a bit. She was a big one, and she was coming in a hurry, too, looking like a black cloud with rows of glowworms around it. But all of a sudden she bulged out big and scary, with a long row of wide-open furnace doors shining like red-hot teeth, and her monstrous bows and guards hanging right over us. There was a yell at us, and a jingling of bells to stop the engines, a powwow of cussing and whistling of steam, and as Jim went overboard on one side and I on the other, she come smashing straight through the raft. I dived, and I aimed to find the bottom, too, for a 30-foot wheel had got to go over me, and I wanted it to have plenty of room. I could always stay under water a minute. This time I reckon I stayed under a minute and a half. Then I bounced for the top in a hurry, for I was nearly busting. I popped out to my armpits and blowed the water out of my nose and puffed a bit. Of course there was a booming current, and of course that boat started her engines again 10 seconds after she stopped them, for they never cared much for raftsmen. So now she was churning along up the river, out of sight in the thick weather, though. I could hear her. I sung out for Jim about a dozen times, but I didn't get any answer, so I grabbed a plank that touched me while I was treading water, and struck out for shore, shoving it ahead of me. But I made out to see that the drift of the current was towards the left-hand shore, which meant that I was in a crossing, so I changed off and went that way. It was one of these long, slanting, 2-mile crossings, so I was a good long time in getting over. I made a safe landing and climb up the bank. I couldn't see but a little ways, but I went poking along over rough ground for a quarter of a mile or more, and then I run across a big old-fashioned double log house before I noticed it. I was going to rush by and get away, but a lot of dogs jumped out and went a-howling and barked